For college, I lived in a coastal Californian town and frequented the clubbing scene. There was a particular part of the town that was essentially a city of mansions. The feeling in this area during the day had a sense of confusion. Roads made no sense, and you could easily find yourself driving in circles or even leaving at points opposite of where you headed. I had always chalked this up to the winding roads easily defeating my sense of direction. Because of this, it was easy to avoid police checkpoints, and it was a shortcut to the college. At night, though, it became something else entirely. The roads lacked lights or any illumination whatsoever, and tall oaks obscured the sky. I became convinced that something was watching me when I took those roads. I dismissed these feelings to the normal creepy road phenomena, and it stayed that way for a while. After one particular night, I was driving a couple friends home. I was the designated driver, and decided to take a shortcut I knew through the roads when I saw someone walking along the road up ahead wearing a hoodie and jeans. I thought nothing of it until I noticed a limp in his gait and decided to give him a ride wherever he needed to go, perhaps even the hospital if need be. Pulling up past it, I rolled down the window and asked it if it needed anything. A row of jagged teeth and hollow eyes greeted me and my friends. The teeth were arranged in a stretched smile. The car immediately erupted into screams and yells to drive, and so I did. However, the more I panicked, the less sense the roads began to make. Every turn became more confusing and frightening. What's worse is that at every turn the thing was there to greet us with its smile, and clawed fingers pointed directly at me. What should have been a 5-minute drive became at least 30 minutes of squealing tires and sobs. This is where it hit me. The more panicked and frightened I became, the worse things got. Pulling my willpower together, I put my fear aside and concentrated on getting out of these roads. The next turn took me to a road along a small lake leading out of those cursed roads. I took one look back to see the smiling man curling one of his fingers, beckoning me back.
I'm tired of carrying this as my burden. I don't know what she wants or why she chose me. I just hope someone out there can help. Please. I'm so tired. In winter of 2010, I worked in a department store warehouse. On a busy day, I went up and down 10-foot ladders probably hundreds of times retrieving merchandise. Nothing washed away the tension and dust of that warehouse like a hot bath. A steamy soak in the tub after work quickly became a ritual. One icy December night, an exhausted me arrived home to find the apartment was freezing. The last thing I wanted after trekking across town through frosty streets. I had been stupid enough to leave the window above my futon wide open after airing out the morning's bong smoke. I must have forgotten to close it in my rush to work. I was pissed at my forgetfulness, but the irritation immediately gave way to a much darker emotion. Nothing scared me more than the thought of an intruder. My house was for me, not for dark figures bent on doing harm. I slowly peered into the bathroom from the doorway about 5 feet away, afraid a deranged psycho from the street saw my absent-mindedness as a sinister opportunity. The bathroom was empty. My apartment was a tiny studio, so if Freddy Krueger, or whoever, wasn't hiding behind the bathroom door, I was definitely alone. I breathed a giddy sigh of relief. I started the bathwater and went to light the propane heater the landlord installed what must have been decades ago. Upon removing the access panel, my entire body shuddered. After the winter storms of the year before, I made sure to always keep a lighter by the pilot light. I never wanted to shiver my way through another icy winter night without the heater blazing. I never moved this one lighter, so why the hell was it missing now? I froze at the thought for a good minute or two, thinking about what I should do. There was no one in the place now, and the window was good and locked, as was the deadbolt on the door. I urgently lowered the cheap blinds, terrified of the darkness beyond the glass. I sat on the edge of the futon for a good 10 minutes, breathing deep, trying to calm myself. I was smoking lots of weed back then, so I ultimately forced myself to believe it was hiding in some pair of jeans somewhere. I refused to look through my pockets in case I was wrong. The cold was manageable, but the fear of an intruder was not. I took a few more deep breaths and slipped into the hot bath water to clear my mind. After an hour, I was totally relaxed, giggling at what a pussy I was. I drained the tub, dried off, and bundled up in layers to prepare for a cold night. Grabbing the remote, I switched on the shitty little 15-inch cathode tube TV that served mostly as a nightlight and background noise for me to fall asleep to. I wrapped the down comforter in any little blankets I had around me, making a nice little shell to catch my body heat. I never once looked toward that window. As my makeshift incubator grew warmer, my eyelids felt heavier. The grainy basic cable drifted out of my consciousness as sleep overcame the cold. What happened after I fell asleep will stay burned in my mind's eye forever. There's really no way to candy coat this, so I'll just describe it as best as I can. I have no explanation. Tears are welling in my eyes as I think about this. It's the most detailed dream of my life. The dream was so realistic that I thought I woke up, only to find it was not in my apartment, and I sure as hell was not me. Whoever's eyes I was seeing through was hunched over a knotty wooden table. The air was extremely humid, and wherever this was, winter was long gone. Dust covered every flat surface in the room, and the primitive wooden floorboards were caked in grime. The walls had been mostly stripped of their paint and were instead covered in mold. An antique full-length mirror was shattered in the corner, covering the floor in shards of glass. A large piece of mirror rested on the table, covered in whitish-yellow crystals and powder. All the tools for hardcore drug use were laid out in front of me. A burn-covered light bulb, a small cracked torch lighter, several rusty-looking spoons and needles. The strangest part of the whole scene was the presence of actual physical sensations, which I usually never feel in dreams. All the muscles in my body were cramping, trembling uncontrollably, and I could actually feel it. The cracked, peeling skin on my hands horrified me the most. Every fingertip was blistered, and deep scabs ran the length of my forearms. I wanted to scream, to call 911, to end the misery, but I was not in control. This was not my body. In an instant, searing pain shot through my chest. My eyes rolled back into my skull. It felt as though a power drill was boring through my ribs and into my heart. The agony quickly enveloped my whole body. I was dying. I collapsed face first into the floor, hundreds of jagged shards digging into my skin as I writhed and seized. My mind screamed, "Please, wake up! Wake up! Oh my God! Why am I not waking up? Oh my fucking God!" While this body shut down, my eyes rolled back from inside my skull and I saw the room once more in slow motion. Only there was someone else with me. In the corner, curled up, staring at me with a hauntingly blank expression, was a little girl. Her hair matted with grease and her face was obscured by dirt. Her once white summer dress was heavily soiled and hung loosely from her skeletal body. She clearly had not eaten in weeks. In her arms was a ragged clump of fur. The child stood up, a few tears rolling down her cheeks. As she crossed the room, I saw she was clinging to a limp cat. Time returned to normal and brought with it the pain. My field of vision flooded with white, and in a second, I was back in my bed. For a minute, I was stunned, and I had no idea what to think. Then I noticed I was absolutely drenched in sweat. I unwrapped my blanket cocoon, expecting the room to cool me down, but the temperature in the studio was exactly as it had been in the dream. The heater was now roaring. Fear and confusion were creeping up on me when I heard a noise from inside the bathroom. A silhouette appeared in the doorway and began moving toward the bed. I became paralyzed. Every fiber of my being told me to scream, to jump out the window, to grab something and start swinging, but the sheer terror was wholly overpowering. The figure stepped into the glow of the TV, and I could see it was the little girl from my dream. Her limbs were like tree branches, gnarled and extremely bony. Her eyes sank back into her skull as she ambled closer. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear the blood pumping through my skull. She reached the edge of the bed, staring directly into my eyes. Her mouth opened unnaturally wide in a silent scream, and both the furnace and the TV shut off, plunging me into complete silence and darkness. I prepared myself for death, or worse. After a few minutes, my eyes adjusted to the moonlight. My apartment was empty. The cry of a small animal broke the silence, and a wave of eerie serenity washed over me. I fumbled around for the remote and turned the television back on. There was again like a chipmunk or something. I cautiously peeked over the edge of the futon to see a tiny white kitten gazing up at me, meowing pitifully. I picked it up and it started licking my hand. I had absolutely no cause to think this, but for some reason, I just knew this animal would do me no harm. I looked up and saw 3 people smiling at me from the television. A gorgeous woman stood next to an equally attractive man. In front of them was a young girl with long, shiny blonde hair under a white bow, wearing a perfectly ironed white summer dress. Her innocent smile faded to the same haunting gaze she had in the dream, and her dress reverted to the tattered, stained rag. The 2 adults became twisting, thorny shadows, and within seconds the image faded to static. The waves of emotion were too much for me, and I broke down sobbing. I couldn't stop crying until the sunrise 5 hours later. The next day, I called my parents for the first time in 3 years. After a long heart-to-heart with my dad, they let me move back in, and I started school in the fall. This wasn't the last time I saw the little girl. Angel, the kitten, disappeared about 9 months after the events from this entry. Then I saw her in my dreams. She hasn't appeared in person again, but I have come to accept sleeping means I'll see her. And she'll show me things. Ghastly and beautiful things.
There was a running joke that our workplace was haunted. It was an older office building, and we were on the 33rd floor. I had been skeptical, but my attitude changed as the rainy summer wore on. A strange quality seemed to hang about the place, coming and going at odd times. I soon developed the ability to sense it beginning. I would be working, eating, talking, some mundane activity, and then I would feel a slight rotation of reality, as if existence itself had faded into a subtly different spectrum. It was during those times that work became grey and unbearable. Paranoia was the first and most vague symptom. I would repeatedly sense someone coming up behind me, and I'll tap back to my work only to find myself alone. I would hear soft footsteps on the carpet, or see a shaded flash of someone approaching in propagated reflections. But there was never anyone there. There was only the ever-present gloomy rain against the glass walls of our floor. The other interns reported these same experiences in hushed tones. Then, equally without warning, the indescribable tilt would fade. Reality would right itself, and the 33rd floor would become a normal cubicle farm again. The occurrences became disturbing enough that we took to researching the effects. We each took a different category. Jake investigated whether the place had a history, and Steve looked into similar experiences reported elsewhere. I turned to science and soon struck gold. I found a published paper that detailed how a standing airwave of a certain frequency could cause an unexplained sense of fear, paranoia, and even visual hallucinations. The study seemed to explain exactly what was happening. We were immensely relieved. That discovery also happened the day before we were scheduled to run the office alone for the afternoon. All of our co-workers were slated for a corporate restructuring meeting. Steve suggested that it was the perfect opportunity to play around with the air system. I agreed, wanting to alleviate my fears by taking control of them and making them seem harmless. Jake agreed as well, though he seemed hesitant. It came as no surprise that the afternoon in question was gloomy and rain-soaked. We saw nothing but streaked rain through the windows around our floor. The atmosphere was perfect for our game. We wanted to see how far we could push the experience and bet on who could stand it the longest. I found the floor's air controls in a hallway closet and we messed with them in an attempt to modulate whatever it was that caused the strange effects. After a few adjustments, I felt that inexplicable shift. It was working. A few more minutes of tinkering caused another, deeper shift, and I knew we'd done it. The very air seemed to pound through my head in a manner imperceptible and impossible. We returned to our desks, alone on the floor. We sat in sight of each other, so the first few minutes were spent joking and laughing about how tough we were. That stopped at the first distant noise we heard. We each snapped to face the distant end of the office, but saw nothing. I could feel my heart beating faster, and I knew it was starting. A loud noise erupted under my hands, and I jumped up. They watched me, stifling laughter, as I answered the phone. We continued working for another 20 minutes, occasionally looking around for something we couldn't specify. The various offices around seemed to take on a menacing cast, as if somebody was hiding just inside them and watching us whenever we looked away. I remember looking at Steve and noticing how real he looked, like a movie on the wrong frame rate. He looked like a textured sack of flesh and organs moving about, and the thought profoundly disturbed me. That's what he really was. Something moved at the other end of the floor. Again we jerked to look. This time I thought I saw a grey shoulder as someone slipped into a cubicle. I peered at the spot but saw nothing further. I slid my chair around with a start as something clattered behind me, but again I saw nothing. I turned back to Jake and Steve, who watched me with wide eyes. I felt another shift, and the blanket on my thoughts grew heavier as the floor's emotional connotations faded further into a dark and unfamiliar space. "Where's Steve?" I asked, turning to Jake. He seemed worried. I was literally just looking at Steve a moment ago. Or was I? Did I look at Jake and merely imagine that Steve was also there? We jumped up and ran to the hallway, where we found him closing the closet door that held the air controls. I could almost feel the building pulsing. It seemed to sync my heartbeat and breathing with a rolling heaviness in my awareness. "Just seeing if I can't," Steve began. "Can't what?" I asked. "Didn't you ask me to turn it up?" Steve asked, forming his words with trouble. I shook my head. Jake grabbed my arm, and we three turned as one. At the distant end of the hallway, at the T-junction, a grey form walked past. Steve yelped, and we ran back into the cubicle space proper. A grey shade took slow, jerking steps between the foam walls a few rows down. It seemed to be facing away from us, and we hid behind a desk as it turned. Something hurt inside my head, just above my eyes. Steve looked even more like a grotesque sack of flesh, leaking shiny fluid from vivid pores on his sagging skin, and I found myself unable to look at him, even as I had to crouch next to him in our hiding spot. We froze in silent terror as the indefinite grey apparition took halting, broken steps past our hiding place. I somehow summoned the strength to look up as it passed, and saw in its ragged outline an expanse of undulating nothingness. A circle and a jagged line floated through it, and I realized what I was seeing. "Come on," I whispered, fighting an intense lethargy that tried to prevent me from speaking. "It's not real. It's in our eyes. I saw veins." I staggered to my feet and helped pull Jake up. I couldn't bring myself to touch Steve, who now seemed to me to be an aberrant abomination of quivering and pulsing organs. I was seeing him as he truly was, without my mental filter that made people seem like people. I turned to continue toward the hallway, but froze. Dozens of grey entities stood throughout the maze of cubicles, watching us. They seemed to shift and redefine each time I moved my eyes. I took a step and they made jerky motions toward Jake and I in sync. I kept telling myself that they weren't real, but I could feel their eyes on me. I felt their malice. I took one step at a time, carefully wending our way through the cubicle maze as the apparitions took steps in rhythm with mine, trying to reach us. Sweat poured down my face as I calculated each next step, finding myself further and further from the door to the hallway. What the hell was I doing? I couldn't focus. The floor's breath still pulsed through my head. Jake's nails dug into my arm. The atmosphere shifted negative even further. The rain-slick windows visibly darkened as if night had fallen. I looked at Jake, whose eyes were glazed with terror. When I looked back, the grey forms were vanishing one by one, each turning to the south wall of glass before fleeing into nothingness. There came an overwhelming sense of something approaching. I ran for the hallway, Jake hot on my heels. The closet door with the air controls was already open. Had Steve found his way here without us noticing? Who had adjusted them the final time? The living pulse of the floor rang through me with an intensity so full that I knew the perfect frequency had been found. I wasn't about to wait around to experience what was going to happen. My fingers cracked into the door. I stared at them in pain and reached to open the door to the air system controls that I had sworn was open. I couldn't locate the handle. I could see parts of it, but was unable to recognize the object itself. "Jake, open the door," I told him, but he just stared at me in terror. I started flailing at the slick metal, and I felt it open just as the hallway lights dimmed. My hand went for the controls, finding them this time, and I shut it off. A rush went through me a moment later, a barely discernible lifting of the weight on my thoughts. It was just enough for me to pull Jake into an elevator and hit a button for another floor as the hallway became pitch black. As the elevator doors closed, I felt an awareness brush past, something heavy and filled with rage that had barely missed us. I felt reality shifting back to light and normality as I wiped blood from my nose. "No," Jake muttered. "We can't." "Can't what?" I asked him. "I didn't tell you," Jake continued. "I didn't want to believe it. The place did have a history, reports of things. They got worse the fewer people there were." I froze with agonizing fear and regret. We had left Steve alone on that floor. Somewhere above us, a scream echoed with soul-chilling terror. I lived the next few days in fearful panic, which turned to confusion when I returned to work the following Monday. Steve was there, sitting at his computer and doing his job, and made no mention of our game gone horribly awry. I watched him covertly for hours, still seeing a mechanical contrivance of flesh and pulsing organs instead of a person. I thought it was just my imagination, except for his eyes. They were lifeless and dull. I shuddered and had the urge to hide whenever his gaze fell on me. When he spoke, his words seemed to mask a dark void, and his smile was empty and mocking. It was at the end of the day that I finally snapped and ran. It was his goodbye. As he waved at me, I had the flash impression of an enormous black shadow over him, pulling strings like a marionette. His arm jerked in mockery of a living wave, and it was then I knew Steve was dead. All that remained of him was a corpse, pulsing, breathing and walking around as some sort of twisted prank. His lifeless eyes watched me go with a tilted, off-kilter smile. "So, who do you think won our game?" his voice called out as I ran for the elevator. His laugh echoed behind me. I never returned to that building.
I don't tell people this story much. I'm just typing it out because my therapist suggested it. Hey, couldn't hurt, right? He doesn't believe me anyway. It'll be nice to have someone hear the story and not immediately dismiss it out of hand as bullshit. Or maybe you guys will too. Suppose I don't really care anymore. Anyway, this all started when 3 friends, Alex, Paul, and Chris, and I were in the woods behind Paul's house, sneaking cigarettes. We were all 15, except for Alex, who was 14 and lived on Chris's street. We just started smoking thanks to Chris, who was far more rebellious than the 3 of us. Plus, his dad smoked. So we'd started hanging out at Paul's house more, and foraging further and further into the woods to find a good spot to stand around, smoking cigarettes, and feeling cool. That afternoon, we'd found a narrow path, and followed it for a good 15 minutes or so. Eventually, we saw a little shack in the distance, silhouetted against the setting sun. We walked around it and could tell that it was in disrepair. The roof was sagging, and the window next to the door was missing 3 of its 4 panels. "Paul, have you ever been back here and seen that?" Chris asked, stepping forward and ducking under a branch to get a better view at the house. "Nope," Paul said, his cigarette in his mouth, and leaned against the tree. "We don't own these woods, and no one ever comes back here because none of my neighbors wants the duty of keeping the path clear." "It's probably a storage shed," I offered. We got closer and could see that the set of steps up to the front door looked rotten and unstable. "Oh shit!" Alex was the first to notice a large, dark stain on the small square of porch in front of the door. "I'm almost positive that's blood, you guys." We all stopped walking and looked. It certainly looked like blood. I glanced at the others, but I could tell from the looks on Alex and Paul's faces that they weren't too keen on going forward. "Fuck, let's check it out," Chris said, tossing his cigarette aside and putting his hand on the wooden stair railing to the right of the steps. He looked back expectantly when none of us followed him. "I don't know," Paul said dubiously. "I don't want to trespass, especially not into some murder scene. Blood looks pretty fresh. Probably from an animal or something." Chris looked at me, then Alex. "Really? None of you guys want to check it out? You guys are such fags." "Come on, Chris, it's getting dark anyway." I didn't want to seem like a pussy, but I also didn't want to go into the house. It was probably just an animal's blood, but still, who knows? There could be some crazy person living in there or something. Cast a nervous glance at the horizon, noting that the sun was almost gone. "You can stay if you want, man. I gotta get home before my parents get pissed." Chris swore at us again, calling us girls and faggots, but eventually seeing that we weren't gonna change our minds. All during the walk home, he kept making fun of us. When we parted ways, though, that was the last I thought of the shack in the woods for some time. The next week, Chris started to act a little odd. It wasn't noticeable at the time, but a couple of the things he did were off-putting. He'd spend more time relaxing on the grass in front of the school by himself, smoking a cigarette and watching people walk, except the way he did it was creepy. He'd just turn his head and follow their movement until they were gone. Far from normal high schooler awkward, this constant staring seemed almost predatory. Another time we were smoking behind the school. We were all trying to keep up with Chris's new pace so he wouldn't make fun of us for being babies. And a frog hopped along. Chris bent down and scooped it up, staring at it for a few seconds, then put the cigarette out on the frog's back. Actually, the frog's skin seemed pretty wet, so it didn't seem that badly hurt. But it did squirm around a lot. Chris, what the hell? Alex looked disturbed. He was a fairly sweet kid, and this kind of casual sadism didn't go well with his personality. Stop torturing it, man. Chris looked up, and he had a gleam in his eye I hadn't ever seen there before. What, this bothers you guys? He looked down at the frog as if he'd already forgotten he was holding it, stroked it absent-mindedly twice, then without warning wound up and hurled it into the brick wall 10 feet away. The frog hit the wall with a splat, and we all turned away in disgust. What the fuck, Chris? Paul looked pretty pissed. You gonna start kidnapping stray cats now or something? Chris just laughed, flicked his cigarette away, and walked back towards the school. We exchanged uneasy looks. The next weekend, we were staying the night at Chris's house because his parents were out of town. Chris had snuck half a bottle of rum and a third of a bottle of vodka from his parents' liquor shelf, and we were all kind of tipsy. We sat on the couches and talked about girls for a while, but Chris started getting quiet. For 5 minutes, he didn't say anything at all. Then he got up without warning and walked towards the window, looked out, and then turned back to us. Hey, do you guys want to see what I snagged from that house? I didn't even see you go inside, Paul said. Chris waved a hand dismissively. Not with you guys, I went back the next day. You wouldn't believe how much is in that house. Not just in terms of stuff, either. There's knowledge inside that house, man. What? I looked over at Paul, who gave me a wary glance. Chris, what the fuck are you talking about? He turned around and faced us full on. It'll be easier if I just show you guys. It's up in my room. One at a time, though. His face lingered over all three of our faces before settling on Alex. You first. He turned and walked out of the room without waiting, and we could hear his footsteps going up the stairs. We all exchanged nervous glances. Alex, we can come with you, dude, Paul said, setting his cup on the counter and looking worried. Alex took a swig from his cup and shook his head. Nah, man, no need, I'm set. He didn't look all that worried, but he did look a bit drunk. It's probably nothing anyway. He walked out of the room a little unsteadily. We heard him go up the stairs and heard the door to Paul's room open. There was a pause of about 20 seconds. Then, a high-pitched scream. We heard running footfalls descend the stairs and then the sound of the front door bursting open. Paul and I looked at each other, panicking, then followed. We saw Alex's back disappearing up the street. Alex! I yelled. Alex stopped running maybe 75 yards away and threw up all over the sidewalk. He straightened up, wiped his mouth, and kept running. What the fuck? Paul and I turned and jumped to see that Chris was waiting in the doorway. What the fuck did you do to him? I asked, fists clenching. Chris laughed and crossed his arms. He was drunk, dude. He kept weaving, and he took a good 5 seconds to react to what I showed him. If he was sober, he probably wouldn't have flipped like that, I bet. It's not that cool. What the hell was it? Alex wasn't super brave, sure, but then again, not even wimps throw up from a scary sight. I was definitely weirded out. Chris stared at me for about 10 seconds. See for yourself. He turned and walked back up the stairs. I turned to Paul. Seriously, what the fuck? He looked worried. I'm going to check on Alex. Dude, just go home. Fuck whatever he found. This is fucking weird. Seriously, man, don't feel some bullshit need to find out what it was. I'd get far away if I was you. I nodded, and he took off up the street after Alex. I looked up towards the top of the stairs. If I was sober, I might have gone home, but I was curious too, and Alex was kind of a wimp. I went back into the kitchen, opened the tool drawer under the sink, and stuck the buck knife that belonged to Chris's dad in my pocket. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I wasn't going up there empty-handed in case Chris flipped on me. Fingers wrapped around the buck knife in my pocket, I went up the stairs and pushed the door to Chris's room open. The light was off, and Chris was standing over by his desk, hard to make out in the gloom. I cautiously moved across the floor, gripping the buck knife harder. "You want to see it?" He had some kind of box in his hands. I edged a little closer cautiously, nodded once. He took off the lid of it just a crack. I bent over and went to take a look. I only got a brief glimpse before Chris shut the box suddenly, but I straightened up fast. "Fuck, Chris!" "Did you see it?" he demanded. "Not enough to get a good look." "Chris, were those eyes?" I had seen them looking back at me. I was sure of it. Human-sized eyes, white, bloody spheres the size of golf balls. "Chris, are those real?" "Don't worry about it, just get out." Chris put the box back in his desk and started pushing me towards the door. I didn't resist. "Chris, what the fuck? What's going on?" "Just go home. I messed up. I gotta go check on Alex." He started moving down the stairs ahead of me, walked into the kitchen. I stood near the front door, hesitant. "Chris!" He didn't know what to say. "Just go. It'll be fine." I went. I didn't know what to do. I walked home, a solid 20-minute walk, looking over my shoulder the whole way. My parents were still at a movie. I was freaked out. I went up to my dad's office and booted up his computer, deciding to see if there'd been anything in the news about the shack or recent disappearances. I debated calling my parents, but I was sure I still smelled like alcohol and decided against it. I remembered how the two pupils in the box had stared up at me. They had certainly seemed real. What the hell had Chris found in that shack? About 20 minutes later, I hadn't found anything, but a movement outside the window made me whip my head around nervously. I looked out the window and saw a figure on the other side of the road outside my house. It wasn't moving and appeared to be looking up and down the street. I was paranoid before, but now I was a wreck. I turned off the light in my dad's office and snuck back to my room, grabbed a baseball bat, and came back in time to see the figure approaching the porch. As he moved towards the light, I could see it was Chris. I relaxed a little and was about to go downstairs to open the door when he moved further into the porch light. His shirt and pants were covered in dripping red. At first, I thought he had been hurt, but I remembered the way he had taken his time crossing to my house, casing the neighborhood first. Not the actions of someone who needs help. My heart started beating fast in my chest. Chris raised his hand and the light glinted off something silver. At first I thought it was a knife and my breath caught, but then I saw it was just a spoon. He tapped on the door with it 3 times. As he did so, I could see that his shirt was clearly streaked with blood. Fuck. I dropped the bat and skittered down the stairs on my hands and knees, desperately hoping to be able to lock the door before he tried the knob. I tried to stay quiet as I crawled like a spider on all 4s to the door. But when I reached the latch, I heard more tapping on the other side and almost shit myself. I recovered and flipped the lock. I then moved to the back of the kitchen, trying to stay in the shadows, and peeked out the windows. Chris's head was swiveling, appraising the empty house. His eyes raked over the window and then stopped. He made eye contact for a brief, horrifying second. Then he lunged forward and tried the doorknob. Upon realizing it was locked, he turned and sprinted away. My house had 2 other doors. I ran to the glass sliding door at the back of the kitchen and turned the lock, a second before Chris came around the side and crashed into it. He reared back and we locked eyes again. He looked terrifying. His lips were twisted up in a snarl, and his eyes were wide and staring. He punched the glass door, but the glass was thick and didn't break. He snarled and raced toward the other side of the house, but I beat him to it, turned the latch, then slid against the door, unable to look out and face that monster again. I heard him walk away and knew he was prowling around the outside of the house. I prayed my parents hadn't left any windows open, but the weather was still nice. I was sure they had. I was dead. My last few seconds on Earth, and all I could do was close my eyes and crouch against the door. The sound of tires squealing jolted me from my stupor. Light flashed against the kitchen wall. A car was pulling into the driveway. My parents were home. I jumped up and ran to the kitchen window, praying that Chris wouldn't hurt them. It wasn't my parents. The car door opened and a man barreled out. He tackled Chris to the ground, sending the bloody spoon flying. The man pulled a pistol from the small of his back and jammed it into Chris's face. I recognized him as Alex's dad, the ex-Marine. He was screaming as he pushed the pistol harder and harder into Chris's cheek. He didn't say much before the gunshot drowned out his words. But I'll never forget what he yelled. My son's eyes! What did you do with my son's eyes?
I used to live in one of those shared buildings, one that has multiple bedrooms and bathrooms, but a shared living area. At the time of this incident, I lived there with 3 other people, a mother and her grown son who shared one part of the living area, and the typical middle-aged, grizzled veteran who had the other one. Most of the time, we didn't interact. I and the mom had jobs at separate ends of town, and the kid apparently helped people move and do chores for cash. The old veteran guy stayed home a lot and ate baked beans. Now, let me get this straight when I say this guy loved baked beans. He had them for every meal. Usually a can of Bush's with some other thing. Usually a bit of whatever the mom made. Though, if the mom and son went out, this guy would have an entire pot of baked beans. I'm sure he had horrible gas, but I never managed to smell it, which was fine by me. He bought the beans on his own pay, so nobody ever complained about it either. At this time, I was a huge fan of MMORPGs, so I would often stay up all odd hours of the night playing them. This particular night, I was talking to some of my online buddies. I don't remember the circumstances around it, but I do remember talking to them about scary stories. As we were telling them, I began hearing creaks and groans in the house. No big deal. This was an old house. It still creeped me out though, and I kept telling my mates to knock it off. They did eventually, but soon after I heard the call of nature. To get to the bathroom allotted to me, I would have to go down the hallway, through the shared area, to the other hallway and the bathroom. Normally no problem, but it was dark and scary out there. Yeah, I know, I'm a wuss. Eventually, I worked up the courage to avoid pissing my pants and go. I opened the door and left it open so I could use the glow of my computer as light. I walked down the hallway as fast as I could go without going into a full-out run, and made my way through the shared space into the bathroom without consequence. I did my duty, then flushed the toilet. When it was done, I realized the house seemed eerily quiet compared to before my trip. Still, I washed my hands and made my way back out. This time, I was slightly more relaxed as I was walking, though it didn't last long, as I almost shrieked when my foot landed in something wet and sticky as I walked through the shared area. I stopped myself from screaming when I realized that it was probably just a spilled can of baked beans that the veteran guy had left open on the counter. I'd probably knocked it over while running to the bathroom. Without even thinking, I grabbed a couple paper towels and mopped up as much of the mess as I could see from the glow of my computer. When that was done, I went back to my room. As soon as I sat down, I noticed the game had logged me out, which was weird since I was sure I hadn't taken that long.
I logged back in to find myself greeted by at least 1,000 frantic whispers, asking me if I was alright, what had happened, etc. I wasn't sure what they were talking about until somebody sent me a log of my whispers to various mates. All of them detailed gruesome, vicious murders, suicides, and other nasty, horrible things, some that still make me shudder when I consider that some human mind must have come up with them. All of these whispers were sent while I was in the bathroom. I couldn't find any explanation for them, seeing as I knew everybody else was in bed. It took 2 hours for my mates to finally calm me down. I didn't think I could get to sleep, but I guess my body eventually drifted off from exhaustion. I woke up the next morning to policemen banging on my door. Apparently, during the night, somebody had broken into the house through a window accidentally left open and taken an axe to the mother and her son. They had then dragged the 2 corpses to the window and left. I was horrified to see the bloody paper towels in the trash can, and then went into nervous panic attacks when a crime scene analyst began detailing how the murders could have happened. I don't remember his entire speech in detail, but I do remember one part, which he told to me directly. "Here, this is where you mopped up the blood. But this spot here, see this stain? This indicates that he kept the bodies here for a good while, almost as if he stood here for a long moment, watching something."
My husband and I moved into our new apartment back in February, when I was about 7 months pregnant. We love this complex. The staff is always friendly and helpful. We've never had any issues with any of our neighbors, except for a crazy old lady that lived under us for about 4 months and complained about us making loud banging noises at all hours of the night, when we had long since gone to bed. She sent the cops to our apartment in the wee hours of the morning several times. And the apartments themselves are very nice. Spacious, high ceilings, brand new appliances, etc. For the last 6 weeks or so, however, we've been dealing with some very noisy, inconsiderate upstairs neighbors. I assume they have a few young children, because we hear them running through the apartment constantly. Stomp, 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 stomp to one wall. Stomp, 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 stomp back to the other. Things falling over. What sounds like someone jumping up and down, up and down, up and down. We've tried our best to ignore it, but it's getting to the point where it's waking us and our daughter up in the middle of the night. Having a child under a year old is hard enough, without asshole neighbors upstairs being noisy and waking us all up every 2 hours. About a week ago, I decided enough was enough. I went upstairs and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. From the way the apartments are set up, if you walk through the front door, you'll pass the kitchen and end up in the living room in front of a door leading to the balcony. So if the blinds are open, you can see the light coming through the peephole outside the apartment. I stood for a moment, watching the peephole, and after there was no answer, I knocked again. I'd heard them banging around upstairs. I knew they were home and was getting upset that they were ignoring me. Suddenly, the light in the peephole started to go out. It started getting dark from one side, as if someone was leaning over to look through. I said, "Hello," and waved at the peephole, and then waited for the door to open. But it never did. I knocked again lightly and said, "Hi, I'm your downstairs neighbor. Can I talk to you for a moment?" And leaned in slightly to listen for a response. But it was completely silent. What must have been no more than a minute, but felt like 5, passed, and I said, "Thanks a lot," and walked back downstairs. When I got to my apartment, I wrote out a note. "Dear neighbors, I am writing this note to you asking if you would please try and keep the noise to a minimum. I understand that there is a certain amount of noise to be expected when living in an apartment, but recently it has gotten out of control. The persistent banging noises and running through the apartment wakes my baby in the middle of the night. I wanted to meet with you in person, but I guess you are out. Please understand I am not trying to be rude. Feel free to come by my apartment anytime if you would like to speak to me. Sincerely, your neighbors downstairs." Running back upstairs, I stuck the note on the door. The peephole was still dark. Fast forward to this morning. The noise has continued off and on for the last week. I'd gone upstairs a few times since I left the note, in hopes that I would catch someone home that would actually open the door, but still hadn't been able to talk to anybody. The note was gone, but apparently they didn't read it, because they were still banging away like always. This morning, my husband and I were sitting at the table drinking coffee when there was a huge bang upstairs from the living room area that sent my daughter into a fit. I completely lost it. They woke us up 3 times last night making noise. I grabbed a broom and banged on the ceiling. I'm still surprised I didn't damage it, until my arm got tired, all the while screaming obscenities at the ceiling. When I finally calmed down, I called the office. I explained the situation to a woman that picked up, and she told me she'd speak with the manager and get back to me ASAP. My husband left for work, and about 20 minutes later, I got a call back from the office. This time the manager was on the line, who I've gotten to know pretty well since we moved in.
Hi, Jenny, how are you? Brittany told me about the noises you guys have been dealing with. You're in apartment 128, right?
Yeah, they're driving us nuts. I left a note the other...
Well, Jenny, nobody lives in that apartment. The last tenant was a single man, and he moved out about 2 months ago.
Are you sure?
Yes.
But that doesn't... Are you sure?
If you like, we can send someone out to check the apartment in a few minutes. But yes, it's been vacant since Mr. Rupert moved out.
About half an hour later, I was standing at the front door of the apartment with one of the other office assistants. The light in the apartment glowed through the peephole. She slid the key into the lock and pushed the door open to the empty apartment. The new carpet showed no signs of someone even walking through it. We stepped inside and looked around, but there was no sign that anyone had been in the apartment recently, except for a pile of shredded paper in the corner of the living room. She walked up to it and began collecting the pieces, and I immediately recognized the writing on the pieces scattered on the floor. It was the note I had left a week ago. Maybe the old lady living under us wasn't crazy after all.
The last few holidays, I had noticed a bit of friction between my dad and my uncle. I didn't think much about it at first. I mean, they are brothers after all, and brothers get into it sometimes. My uncle, though, he was not getting over whatever it was that had been bugging him. I mean, this went on for like 4 years. So, last year, on the day after Christmas, I asked my dad, "What's up with Uncle Ken? He seems really combative lately."
"Well, he's just mad that your mom and I sold your grandma's house after she passed away instead of living in it."
"Oh yeah. Why did you guys end up selling that house?" I asked. My dad seemed to get a bit flustered and he said,
"Well, it was just a really old house that needed a bunch of work and we didn't really feel like restoring it."
And I left it at that. A while later, I was talking to my mom about something. I don't really remember what, but she said, "We didn't sell your grandma's house because it was too old." "Oh?" I asked. "Now, I didn't tell the other kids about this, but do you remember after your grandma passed away, your dad and I went to go clean up her place?" "Sure." "Well, the first day we went there, we met up with your Uncle Ken, Sharon, Jeff, Greg, and Aaron. Your dad and I got there a few hours earlier and started cleaning out the garage and most of the basement. We ended up working straight until almost 10 o'clock at night, and by that time we were too tired to drive home from Berwyn, so we just decided to stay the night." "Did Ken and Sharon stay the night too?" "No, they left a few hours before then." "That sounds about right." "So your dad and I went to go sleep in his mom's old room." "Really? That's kind of creepy." "I guess he thought it might help him feel closer to his mom. After his dad passed away, it was really hard for him to watch her grieving so much. I always thought that she died so soon afterwards because she just missed him so much." "Yeah, I could definitely see that." "So your dad wakes up in the middle of the night because he thought he heard something downstairs." "Like what?" Well, he wasn't sure at first, but he thought he heard someone calling his name. Are you serious? Absolutely. He turned the light on and looked at the door and heard it again. It sounded like his mom calling his name. So he went out into the hallway, and sure enough, he could hear his mom saying, "Phil, Phil." And he says that it didn't sound like distant or ghosty or anything like that. He said it sounded like she was just talking to him. So he went out into the hallway and turned the corner, and at the end of the stairs, he saw her and your grandpa standing there. He said that they didn't look half transparent, and they weren't glowing or anything like that. They just looked solid, like you or me. He did say that your grandpa looked very, very tired, and your grandma, well, she didn't look bad, she just looked heavy, you know, like she was sad. Are you kidding me? Not at all. In fact, the next day, after your dad left, I found this, she said, pulling out an old diary from under the table. Wait, so you guys stayed the night? After your dad saw that, he rushed back into the bedroom and locked the door, which, by the way, had 3 locks on it. One in the knob, 1 deadbolt, and 1 chain. We didn't know why at first, but the knob and the chain had been broken off, like the door had been kicked down. He left the light on all night and left first thing in the morning. You stayed behind? He didn't tell me what had happened until much later. I figured he was just too emotional to be there so soon. So he left you in the house with the ghosts? Well, he figured I would probably just call him crazy. You know your dad. Do you think he believes in ghosts? No, of course not. Right. So, like I was saying, I found this diary that your grandma started keeping after your grandpa died. Oh, I didn't know she had been keeping one. Oh, me neither. It starts off pretty normal. She does write about how sad and lonely she was after Grandpa Jim died. She really only talks about him for the first few pages. Then after that, it's mostly really in-depth stories about her going out and talking to her girlfriends and shopping and all that. For the first few weeks, she wrote every day. Then it was every other day. And then it started getting really sad. Like here. She opened up the diary to a page that had been dog-eared. The only thing it said was, "Spent some time in the garden today. I miss Jim." The handwriting was pretty sloppy, but I didn't really think much of it. My grandma never had very steady hands, and I knew her arthritis was getting pretty bad near the end. Adam, you know the garden was the only place your grandma never went, right? My mom said. Really? I replied. That's where your grandpa had his heart attack. She never went out there. Here, keep reading. The next entry was dated a week and a half later. It said, "Feelin' lonely." My mom looked at me, and she had the most dead serious look on her face. If you knew my mom, you'd know that she's the type who always has something witty to say, always cracking jokes, and even when she's serious, she's never that serious. But the look she was giving me at that moment, at least to me, was downright unnerving. From here, it gets pretty morbid. And that's all she said. The next entry was a little over 2 weeks from the last one. It read, "Last night I was woken up in the middle of the night. I thought I heard something downstairs. I turned the light on and put my hearing aid in and listened for a minute. I heard something again. It sounded like maybe the TV was on downstairs, but I hadn't been watching TV. I put my robe on and opened the bedroom door. I could hear it more clearly. It sounded like James. He kept saying, 'Eleanor, Eleanor.' But it was quiet, not like he was moaning or yelling or anything. I went to the stairs, and I saw him at the bottom of the stairs looking up at me. It wasn't a ghost, it was him, and he looked real sad, tired and sad. he looked at me and said, "Eleanor." And I turned and ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I know I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. The next entry was from the next day. I had a man come by and put extra locks on the bedroom door. There is the lock in the door now, a deadbolt, and a chain. He looked at me like I was crazy, but I know I'm not crazy. Last night when I went to bed, I locked all 3 locks, left the TV in the bedroom on, and the lights. I thought I heard James again, but it might have just been the TV or the wind or something. The next entry, dated 2 days later. For the last few nights, I've been sleeping with the TV and the lights on. I haven't been woken up by James again. The next entry, dated the next night. I went to go have lunch with Florence today. I wanted to tell her about James, but I didn't dare. There isn't no way she'd believe me. She was telling me about a cruise her and Ruth were going to take in the fall up to Alaska to see the glaciers. I think I should go. It would do me good to get out of the house for a while. We had to end lunch early because storm clouds were coming in, and she doesn't like to drive in the rain. The next entry, dated later that night, 2:30 a.m. The power went out. I heard James calling me from outside the door. I unlocked the doorknob and the deadbolt, and I cracked it open to look out into the hallway. I saw him on the floor. He was on his belly, pulling himself around the corner towards my room. He looked just awful, just awful, just awful, just awful. His face was falling apart, and his hands were just skin and bones. And his eyes, he was growling at me. He's coming to get me. There was only one more entry, I think. It covered over the next 5 or 6 pages, and it just said, "He's coming to get me," over and over again. It might have been written the same night. It is completely impossible to tell.
"So,"
my mom said,
"we never really told you what happened with your grandma."
I looked at her, but I didn't say anything.
"Your Aunt Marie went by her place about a week after that. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. She used her key to get inside, and she saw that all the lights were on, even though it was the middle of the day. She went upstairs and heard the TV coming from inside her room. She knocked and knocked, but there was no answer. Marie called the police and told them what was going on, and they came out with the fire department and some EMTs. They were able to break the door down. Apparently your grandma had just locked the doorknob and the chain. They found your grandma in the far corner, curled up underneath a blanket. They said she'd been there about 6 days and had died of dehydration. After we found out what had happened, your dad didn't want anything to do with the house. So we put it on the market and got rid of it as fast as we could. We didn't want to tell Ken what had happened. I'm sure you can understand why."
About 10 years ago, I was recently divorced and living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. The place was clean and the rent was decent. One of those places that had a doorman. I felt safe here. I was alone and loving it, focused on my career and not on my clingy ex-husband. Things were finally looking up for me. At the time, I was working pretty late at the office and would often stumble into my apartment sleep-deprived in the early hours of the morning and wake up by 6:30, 7-ish to start the day. I started noticing that in the morning my door would be unlocked sometimes. I usually dismissed this as my sleep-dead brain, thinking that the bed looked more appealing than locking the door. Another thing that I noticed since moving in was that I seemed to misplace things more than I used to. Little things, like a hairbrush or nail polish, that sort of thing. It wasn't really that big of a deal, just enough to be a slight annoyance in my day. The longer I lived there, the more frequently I seemed to forget to lock the door. At first it was every once in a while, then it seemed like an almost daily occurrence. More things went missing, Things like pictures, shaving razors, and most disturbingly, my underwear. This went on for long enough that I started to get a little paranoid. I started to take the time at night to make sure the door was locked. I got into a habit of every night after I locked the door to turn the handle 3 times and say to myself, "It's locked, it's locked, it's locked." Time after time, I would wake up and the door would be unlocked. One time, I even tried staying up all night to watch the door, but I ended up falling asleep in my chair. I decided that my mind was not reliable enough to stay up all night, so I invested in a video camera. I went all out and bought the fanciest camera that I could get my hands on. So one night, I set the camera up facing the door. I hid the camera under a pile of towels on the floor. I locked the door and went to bed. When I woke up, my apartment looked normal. Nothing missing that I could see. I decided to check the tape. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage, not seeing anything. I was just about to give up when I noticed the handle of the door jitter. Then it slowly crept open. A figure slid through the half-open door and walked towards the camera. It paused, looked around as if it was listening for something, then walked forward into direct view of the camera. I paused the camera. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck started to rise. I was staring directly into the face of the maintenance man of the building. I could see those big, thick glasses and curly hair. I had no doubt who it was. I played the tape a little more. He looked comfortable as he walked around the apartment. Then he turned and walked towards my bedroom and out of the view of the camera. I didn't know what to do. Sobbing, I called the police. I tried to explain over the phone, but couldn't. Soon enough, 2 officers arrived at my doorstep. I told them everything and showed them the tape. I remember seeing the blood drain from their faces. They promised me that I was safe and that they were going to get this guy. I needed to lay down, but didn't want to be alone. One of the officers offered to stand outside my apartment door as I took a nap. As I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, but too drained to move, something kept nagging at me. I laid there for a few minutes, tossing and turning, unable to get comfortable or rest. My mind was racing. Then a realization slowly washed over me and chilled me to the bone. We watched the tape and saw the man enter my home, but we never saw him leave. I froze, then started shaking. I needed to get to the front door. I sat up and looked around the room. I couldn't see anyone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed cautiously. My feet hit the cold wood floor, and I felt warm breath on my ankles. I raced out of my apartment as fast as I could and to the safety of the police officer. He called for backup. They found the man under my bed, clutching a knife and a Polaroid camera. To this day, I cannot sleep alone.
I was all of about 5 years old. My mother, who was pregnant with my little sister, was in the car with me and my dad as we were out on a fishing trip at a nearby river in Montana. The road to this area often fell into states of ridiculous disrepair. In certain areas, you had to drive extremely carefully if the vehicle you were driving in didn't have four-wheel drive. This particular event happened in mid-June. The surrounding area was serene, but somewhat creepy at times. Being fairly high up in the mountains, it was not uncommon for the weather to still be pretty cool and wet. That day was no exception. One side of the road was a steep decline that went to the river. The other side was an even steeper incline that went up into thick trees, and on that particular day, thick fog. We had been fishing for a while with little success. I know this because if my father was in a good spot, you couldn't move him for all the money in the world. So the fact that we got back into the car from our initial fishing spot and proceeded to drive down the road indicated that my dad was not pleased with his luck at that particular bend of brook. The three of us were in an old Chevy coupe, my parents up front and me by my lonesome in the middle of the back seat. My father got to talking, as he would do, and probably drove a little further than he had intended. He slowly came to a stop when he realized we had come to a point in the road that went into what used to be an old railroad tunnel. The tunnel wasn't that long, maybe half a mile at the most, but it got dark very fast if you went into it. Regardless of its short stretch, the light on the far side felt like the exit to the tunnel was miles away. My dad spoke up.
You know, they say these tunnels are haunted by people who killed themselves on the train tracks.
Stop it! You're gonna scare him!
Well, I'm just letting him know in case we go through and something happens.
My father turned around to face me and looked at me wide-eyed. If I was older, I would have thought it humorous. At 5 years old, it was terrifying. Even before my father's grandstanding, I didn't want to go in there. Something about the very sight of the tunnel unnerved me. Had there been a back door to the car, I would have considered bailing out as my father drove closer. The car crept along at what felt like a turtle-like crawl. It took no time at all for darkness to completely envelop everything. Within seconds, it was so dark inside of the car that I couldn't even clearly see my parents, who were a foot away from me. Suddenly, it became slightly more luminescent as my father popped the round lever that turned on the headlights. There were various bits of debris and rock that had to be navigated around inside of the tunnel. Little bits of barb and concrete that had fallen to the dirt many years before we had decided to traverse this eerie passage. The car came to a sudden halt. Within a second, the lights had been turned off and the engine died.
Mom?
Oh, no!
Stop it! You're scaring him! Knock it off!
My father let out a slight chuckle, though my mother and I were far from amused. The laughter quickly ceased from my dad when he turned the key to the old Chevy only to hear a click sound in response.
Now, what the hell?
Stop messing around! Turn the car back on!
I'm not messing.
Suddenly, the whole car felt as though it hopped into the air, like we had hit a small ramp while moving at a considerable speed. Except, no such thing happened. We were completely still.
What the hell was that?
What are you doing?
Dear, I didn't do that. How would I?
3 huge bumps. It was as if a large, invisible hand was violently rocking the car. My father was now cursing up a storm and frantically turning the key. The car wouldn't respond at all. The car was now rocking without pause. My mother became hysterical. Terrified, I covered my eyes. Then came the screams. At first, I thought it was the frantic cries of my mother, but within seconds I realized that there were 2 sets of screams. My mom's and a much more ear-piercing and sinister scream that sounded as if it was right behind me.
At this age, I had never known what it was like to hear someone scream as if they were dying or about to die. But I knew even at that young age that the screams I heard behind me must have been what they sounded like. And the clawing. They were frantic clawing sounds, like an animal was trapped in a metal box and trying desperately to escape. I felt my mother's arms wrap around me. As much of a moment of release as that was, I could still hear the screaming and clawing. I was still so terrified, I didn't dare open my eyes. My mother's grip began to feel tight. She must have been as scared as I was. Gradually, the embrace tightened to where I started to have trouble breathing. I went to open my mouth to say something, but my mom's hand covered it before I could even breathe a word. Her hand felt ice cold and was trembling. She had to have obviously been so scared that she didn't realize what she was doing. Suddenly, she let me go. I still had my eyes closed until I heard the most relieving of sounds. The old Chevy roared to life. I opened my eyes. The headlights were now on. Both parents were dead silent, as the only sound now was the growl of the old V6, getting us out of that darkened hell. The screaming and rocking had also stopped. My father didn't ease up on the gas at all, even as we exited to the other side of the tunnel. Remember, this was a mountain road that was very poorly maintained. Driving quickly, one risked actually causing real damage to a vehicle, or, even worse, losing control and veering off the road and into the river. My father couldn't have cared less. About 100 yards away from the tunnel, my father gradually came to a stop and pulled off on the side of the road. The three of us were completely silent. Dad slowly opened the door and got out of the car. He walked around to the trunk and opened it. Now, from my perspective, I obviously couldn't see much. Through a small window of space between the trunk lid and the rest of the car, I could see a little bit of my father, and I could tell he wasn't moving. My mother became impatient. "What is he doing?"
Mom?
My voice was incredibly weak.
Yes, dear? You were squeezing me too tight. I couldn't breathe.
When?
Back there.
My mom's face went ghost white.
Honey, I haven't touched you.
After a short while, my father slammed the trunk shut and hurried back into the car. "We're done fishing. We're going home now." My mother asked.
"What?"
Dad just cut her off immediately with a sharp shaking of his head, followed by his eyes flashing back towards me in the back seat. Whatever it was that he saw, he didn't want to discuss it with me present. We finally got back to the house, and my father told Mom to take me upstairs before he unloaded the gear from the trunk. Mom took me by the hand, led me up into the house, and told me to stay in my room and not to come out until they were done bringing the rest of the fishing stuff into the house. Dad and Mom got done bringing everything in. Mom started dinner, and everyone kind of settled back into a more normal routine. I, of course, was still dreadfully curious as to what was in the trunk that I wasn't allowed to see. My father had fallen asleep on the couch, and my mom was preoccupied with her cooking. Even at that age, I knew where they hung the spare keys and which key went to what. I grabbed the key for the old Chevy and went out the front door to tell my mom I was going to play in the yard while I waited for dinner to be ready. I pretended to play a little bit with some sticks in the yard just so I wouldn't get busted by running straight out to the car. Once I had made a couple of glances at the window to make sure I wasn't being watched, I snuck around the yard hedges to where the car was parked. The anticipation was one of excitement, not one of fear. I slid the key into the lock and popped the trunk. My excitement quickly turned into a sensation of pure horror. I was barely able to breathe seeing what it was that I saw. The entire interior of the trunk's upholstery was shredded, as if a wild animal with claws was locked inside of it. There were dark red crusted stains splattered all over the tatters of cloth. And the smell. Oh God, the smell. I was too young to know what I was smelling, but my older self now knows what it was that offended my senses. It was the smell of death. It smelled like dead, rotting flesh, and not from fish. I closed the trunk quietly and snuck back into the house. I never told my parents that I went out and looked at the inside of the trunk. They ended up getting rid of the car a few months later. They practically gave it away for the price that they sold it for. I can't say I blame them. Every fishing trip in that area then after, once we got to the tunnel, we'd turn around and head back the other way. That was always the sign that we had fished all of the river that we had cared to that day. I've revisited that area many times as an adult, and I still can't bring myself to go back in there. Just the sight of the tunnel sends chills down my spine.
Brace yourself for the No Sleep Podcast. It's the No Sleep Podcast, Aiken for 18, Volume 1. I'm your host, David Cummings. With Season 17 in the books, or in the grave, we're excitedly looking forward to Season 18. And to tide you over until its premiere on June 26, we'll have 2 hiatus episodes for you, this week and next, and then 2 delightfully devilish Sleepless Decompositions episodes following those. We have 3 tales for you this week, which were originally released to our Season Pass 17 members. We trust you'll find them to be a soothing elixir for the ache of waiting for Season 18. And so, without further ado, let's launch into the horror and start the show. In our first tale, we're welcomed to the town of Habitsville. It's an odd place. You could call it quirky, you could call it quaint. If you've had a bad experience there, you could even call it cursed. But in this tale, shared with us by author Samuel Singer, you could call it unsurprising. That is, until Sam discovers a new eatery that he's never seen before, despite living his whole life in Habitsville. I join Jesse Cornett and Wafia White in performing this tale. So let's go hang out in Habitsville. We'll check out the stores and grab something to eat. And don't worry about the ingredients. One thing I can promise you is that the Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh.
It's good to be home. After the frankly insane events of the past month or so, there's nothing like settling back into the comfortable life of a small-town newspaper reporter. Except, of course, if that small town is Habitsville. We're prone to the strange here, through no fault of our own. Bizarre things just seem to happen, and just like clockwork, they're happening again. It came to me by word of mouth, but as far as I can tell, it started with a sign. I walked by the bakery myself just to be sure, and there it was, hanging in the window. It was small, white, and plain. The words on it stood out in an unnatural way. Like I should have missed the phrase when I was walking by, but instead found it commanded my absolute attention. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. An odd sort of laugh rose in my throat when I actually saw it. because up until that point, I thought Heather had lost her mind. Heather is my primary coworker at Habitsville Gazette. We're good friends, and often talk about everything from our pieces for the paper to what shows we're binging on Netflix. I know her pretty well, which is why it was strange when she suddenly said something extremely out of character mid-conversation. She'd been talking about her parents coming to visit from a few towns over and how cautious they always were when they came to Habitsville, as visitors often are. We were packing up our things for the day before we went home when she said,
"My parents should be here Thursday, which is way too soon. The apartment's a mess, and it's too small to fit all of us anyway. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. But how do you tell your parents they should get a hotel outside of town?"
I asked her what she meant, but as you might be able to guess, she had no idea what I was talking about. I even repeated the phrase back to her, but not a hint of recognition appeared in her eyes. I went home, and after a while, I forgot about it. But then I heard it again. Stepping outside of my house for work the following morning, I spotted my mailman, Phil, putting a few envelopes into my mailbox. I waved to him and said good morning, and like any polite person, he answered,
Good morning. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh.
He held his smile, as though he hadn't said anything strange, and cheerfully moved to my neighbor's mailbox. I, however, was deeply confused. It felt like some sort of prank, though I had no idea who would orchestrate it and why. I heard it again later that day. In fact, I heard it 17 different times. Some people repeated it. Some only said it once. I even have a transcript from an interview I was supposed to be doing with an old woman who just turned 102, where there, right in the middle of a sentence about her great-grandkids, was the phrase, "The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh." I hadn't heard it when she said it, but it was there, typed out in my notes. So there I was, clocked out early on a Tuesday afternoon, just so I could stand in front of this bakery. I was bewildered, but not just because of the phrase, though that was bizarre on its own. I lived in Habitsville my entire life, and not once have I heard of a place called the Butternut Bakery. And yet, after an afternoon spent wandering the streets of my own hometown, I found a new shop right there in the middle of the main strip. It's a small building, but not so small that I would miss it. The building itself had an inviting burnt orange color, and the yellow lights inside made the entire place look warm and enticing. The smell of baked goods drifted out and over the pavement to where I stood on the other side of the street, fighting the overwhelming urge to go inside. Because there was the sign, wasn't there? The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. It seemed like such an odd thing for a bakery to have to clarify. Maybe it was some sort of fun reference to Sweeney Todd. That's not exactly an appetizing allusion to make to potential customers, but there was something about the sign, something about the phrase. It was like the more that I heard it or read it, the less odd it seemed. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. Of course it doesn't. No bakeries do, or should. It's just good advertising to make the fact clear. I didn't see anyone walk in or out of the bakery for around 15 minutes, though plenty of people walked down the sidewalk. It was strange. Even the window shoppers that were strolling from display to display didn't bother to stop at the bakery. It was the late afternoon when someone might want to grab a snack or a late lunch. But no one gave it a second look. They didn't even seem to notice the smell, which was becoming more distracting by the second. My stomach began to growl as I caught another nostrilful. And then I saw someone emerge from the bakery. I had to squint, and it was hard to recognize him outside of his uniform, but I could still tell. It was Phil, my mailman. He stepped out of the bakery, holding a small bag, and immediately began to walk down the sidewalk. I crossed the street and approached, walking behind him.
Phil!
Oddly, he didn't respond. I thought perhaps he didn't hear me, so I walked faster until I was beside him.
Phil!
At the second call of his name, Phil stopped and turned to look at me. He smiled when he recognized me.
Oh, Mr. Singer! Funny running into you here.
Though his tone would suggest that we were having a normal run-in on the street, it was anything but the sort. There were markings drawn on his face as though he was about to have some sort of cosmetic surgery. There were long strips drawn down his cheeks, and I could see the ink was peeking out from the circle that marked his ear. But as it turned out, that wasn't the oddest part of Phil's appearance. I had thought it was his bag that had been dripping, something dark trailing from the door of the bakery to where we stood now. But since we had stilled, the trickle only came faster and began to pool in a puddle around our feet. It wasn't hard to miss the source. Framed by the frayed edges of the shirt he wore, I could see that there was a large chunk of flesh missing from Phil's shoulder. Not like he had a bad wound that needed to be sewn up. There was nothing to sew. It was a scoop out of his body, and I could see the tip of his shoulder bones poking out where they had connected at the socket. I didn't know what to say. There was no trace of pain on his face. There was no signal that he even knew what he was walking around with. And oddly enough, no one on the street seemed to notice either. I had a brief rush of fear as I considered that perhaps I had lost my own sanity. Then, he said it.
I've just picked up a bit of a treat for myself. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. I've just finished my route for the day.
He unraveled the folded up opening to his bag and held it out to me.
Would you like to try?
I tore my eyes away from the gory wound on his torso and instead peered into his bag. In the bottom, as innocent as could be, was a medium-sized pastry. It was pocket-style, crimped on the edges, no doubt with some sort of filling inside. My stomach was turning violently now, and I just shook my head at Phil.
Suit yourself. This is the second time I've been in this week. It's terrible for my diet, but it's just so good. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. I'll see you tomorrow morning then.
With that, he turned and continued down the pavement, walking with a limp I had never known him to have before. I walked to the front of the bakery. Despite the warm glow coming from inside, the windows were not well suited for a display. The glass had some sort of coating on it, and although I could see the light shining through and dark shapes moving around inside, I couldn't make anything out. I was so focused on seeing inside that I didn't notice when someone had opened the door. The small bell at the top jingled, and I looked up. It was Heather. I lurched forwards and grabbed her by the hand. She flinched in shock and then half laughed.
Sam, God, you scared me. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. Are you going inside?
She motioned into the open doorway, and I looked inside. It's difficult to describe what I saw inside the Butternut Bakery, mostly because the inside seen with the naked eye was strangely similar to the view through the glass. There was this hazy film over everything, and only two certain sights could be gleaned: the bright yellow light and dark shadows moving around in the back.
You shouldn't go in there, Heather. I know this sounds crazy. I know.
I took a deep breath, then said,
But I think the Butternut Bakery is serving human flesh.
Or At least that's what I meant to say. I could hear the words as they came from my lips, though they were not the ones I had chosen at all. I said, "But I think the Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh." I stood there, horrified. Heather furrowed her brow at me, one foot still on the doorstep of the building.
Yeah, Sam, I know. You told me before. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. I think it's great.
I blinked. I told you before? The fear that was rising within me was quickly turning to panic. I had thought Heather had been the first one to say the phrase to me only a few days before, and never did I think I had said it back to her. Well, what when you mentioned it a few days ago? Her frown deepened.
You've been talking about the bakery for over a month, Sam.
I have?
I mean, it's not much of a discussion. You pretty much say the same thing every time.
She leaned back out of the door and pointed to that sign that hung in the window.
The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh.
As I stood there, spiraling, Heather looked down at my hand, which was still clasped firmly on her wrist.
Now, if you excuse me, you're being weird, and I'm hungry.
This shook me from my daze. I couldn't let what had happened to Phil happen to Heather. I pulled hard on her wrist as she took another step towards the interior of the bakery. I tried to warn her, tried to say, "I just saw my mailman come out of there with a huge piece of his body missing. Just missing, Heather. You can't go in there. I don't know what's going on, but it's dangerous." That's what I tried to say. But deep down, I knew what was going to come out. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. 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 I pulled Heather even harder, and she fought back with as much force as she could. The shadows in the back of the bakery were moving faster now, even buzzing around the edges, each vibrating violently with some unseen energy. The yellow glow of the lights burned brighter, so bright I had to squint. I thought of the blood trail I had seen drip from Phil's shoulder, the exposed bones and the ligaments peeking through the mangled skin, the butcher's lines drawn on his face, and I pulled with all my might. Heather lost her footing. We fell backwards, one on top of the other, hard on the pavement. The door she had pulled open slammed, as though sucked back like a vacuum. When it did, the bell at the top jingled violently, and the entire building jumped with the force of the closure. And it was that flinch, that slammed door, that made the sign fall from the window. I saw the words, "The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh," one last time, in plain black text on a white background. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Not just the fallen sign. The entire building was gone. People were walking by us now, as though they hadn't seen what had happened. Instead, they only gave us odd looks and stepped over our bodies. I sat up and looked around. The main street of Habitsville was just as I had always known it, before I first heard that phrase. The one I don't dare speak again.
Molly probably wouldn't have been so bad if not for the Grove. It wasn't like we set out to kill all those folks. Even not having parents to teach us, we knew the difference between right and wrong. Molly just never seemed to care. When we were little, she'd go out of her way to squash the worms that washed onto the road after a hard rain, smearing them all over the pavement. And every summer, she'd go out to collect June bugs in a mason jar, then screw the lid on tight so she could watch them die slow. Still, those were all little things. I don't think it would have gone any further if the grove hadn't made it so easy. It wasn't much to look at, just a ravine full of pine and maple, all overgrown with English ivy, sloping down from the edge of our backyard. The neighborhood had been all woods back in the day, clear-cut and subdivided into residential lots, missing trees memorialized by names like Poplar Avenue and Maplewood Court. Only the grove hung on, surrounded and spiteful. It looked normal from the outside, sure, but you really only had to step inside to know there was something wrong. It's hard to describe. One time in college, Molly and I drove down to West Virginia to catch a reading of one of my favorite authors. Coming from central Ohio, I'd never seen real mountains before. I remember driving up and down, feeling the pressure build inside my head as I changed elevation. Stepping into the grove was kind of like that. Like the trees were all pressing down on you, trying to crush you down into nothing. One time, Molly and I built a fort, spent all afternoon piling up logs, stitching branches together with braided twists of ivy. Excited to try out our new hideaway, we ran up the hill to throw together a picnic lunch. Couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. By the time we got back, the fort was gone. Not taken down, not wrecked, just gone. Like we'd never built it in the first place. I think that's when Molly realized there was something weird about the grove. Even so, we probably would have left it at that if it hadn't been for Felix. It was a class project. A white and brown speckled rabbit Mrs. Parkins had picked up over at the co-op. We fed him, cleaned his cage, all that stuff. And every weekend, one student would get to take Felix home. We were excited as hell when our turn came. Everything would have gone okay if he hadn't bitten Molly. I know what you're thinking, but it wasn't like that. One second, Molly is just holding Felix. The next, she's screaming, her hand all bloody. Then she just sorta threw him against the wall. It was pure reflex, no malice at all, but I guess it was hard enough to snap the rabbit's neck. What can I say? We panicked. Even having no parents to get on our case, we still had to worry about school. Molly had the idea of throwing Felix's body down in the ravine and telling everyone he'd slipped his cage and run off. It wouldn't be great, but it'd be better than saying we'd killed the poor thing. Come Monday, we trudged to class all muddy and downcast. Mrs. Parkins asked why we'd brought an empty cage to school. Nobody remembered. When I finally broke down and spilled the secret, everyone acted like I was making it up. It was like Felix had been squeezed right out of their heads. Mrs. Parkins even got mad at me for talking about blood and broken rabbits. I had to stay in at recess that day. Molly said it served me right for tattling. After that, I was all for counting our blessings. But Molly could never let things go. I think that's when she started killing animals. Dogs and cats mostly, but birds too when she could catch them. I'll never know for sure how many, because she threw them in the grove and only told me about it way later. She could have probably kept on like that forever, no one the wiser. But like I said, Molly could never leave well enough alone. There was this neighbor kid, Dominic. He was 2 grades ahead of us, but liked to hang down by the playground and pick on the younger kids. Molly said he was mean on account of his dad hitting him, but they lived just down the street. I used to watch them all the time from my window, even though I wasn't supposed to. Dominic's dad was always out with him, playing baseball, throwing pitches, working in the yard. And I never saw him lose his temper, not even when Dom rode his bike through the flower beds. Some people are just mean, I guess. Once, Molly and I were playing army soldiers, and Dominic hid down by the trash bin so he could pelt us with rocks. One of them hit me right in the mouth and split my lip wide open. I wanted to tell a teacher, but Molly got this strange look, like when she was catching June bugs. I honestly thought we were just going to rough Dominic up a little. He was bigger than us, and a boy besides, but I figured if Molly and I could get the drop on him, we could get in some good licks. Anyway, we set up a little tripwire on the edge of the ravine, then went down the block to stick a penknife in Dominic's bike tires while he was pitching rocks at squirrels. We made sure he saw us do it, though, and he lit right out after us. Molly and I skipped over the wire, but it caught Dominic about shin height, and he went head over heels down into the ravine. He was pretty bloodied up on account of Molly having smashed a bunch of old Coke bottles down there, but nothing was broken. Well, not at first. Dominic started cussing and yelling about all the shit he was gonna do to us. We thought for sure he was coming up the hill, but then he just started screaming. Molly and I peeked over the edge, and Dominic was just sort of rolling around on the ground, thrashing in the dead leaves. That's when I saw the ivy had grown up all around him. Like strings on a fallen marionette, it threaded his arms, legs, and hands. Then the roots came bursting out from between his ribs, spreading, drawing him down into the rocky soil at the bottom of the ravine. That's when Molly told me what I'd always suspected. How the grove gathered things up and held them tight. I wanted to tell, I really did, but Molly said the police would come, and we'd go to jail forever and never get to see each other again. For weeks after, I was sure that every distant siren, every flash of red, was a cop coming to arrest me. But they never did. Even Dominic's parents went on like they'd never had a son, ignoring the room full of kids' stuff, the size 8 shoes, the stack of rotting Lunchables in their refrigerator. Molly helped herself to Dominic's bike and some other stuff so it wouldn't go to waste. One time, when Molly was away getting groceries, I went to talk to Dominic's parents. It wasn't guilt. Well, maybe a little. I knew better than to say we'd erased their son. I really just wanted to see if they remembered anything at all. They listened for a solid hour, never speaking, never interrupting, while I walked them through their own house, talking about Dominic and pointing to all the little bits of him that were left behind. The way they held hands, faces all screwed up as they listened, I thought for sure something was going to spark behind their eyes. But it never did. When I was done, Dominic's mom thanked me for the nice story and sent me home with a plate of lemon bars. That's all their son was to them now. A nice story. I thought we'd stop with Dominic, but the way Molly talked about all the good we were going to do sent tingles up the back of my neck. She said we were like Batman or Wonder Woman, getting rid of the bad guys. Still, it was years before we could make good. Mr. Framer flunked us both in sophomore algebra. That wasn't the reason we erased him, though. He'd always had this creepy vibe. And it was weird how the pretty girls always ended up with seats near the front of class. What really sealed it was when Molly said Claire Nussbaum told her Mr. Framer held Lisa Atkins after class one day. Claire said when Lisa came out she was crying, and said Mr. Framer had tried to feel up her leg. So, we figured we'd put together a little test. Mr. Framer had superhero posters all over the room. Iron Man, Hawkeye, the Hulk, all that macho bullshit. So, Molly went up to him after class one day and asked if he wanted to come over and see the new Thor movie. She said our parents would be out for the weekend, and we knew how much Framer liked the Marvel movies. We figured if Framer wasn't a creep, there was no way he'd come. I can still remember the way his bones cracked under tightening roots. He died staring at the moon through the branches, wide-eyed, his mouth hanging open like he was trying to scream. The sound that came out was like the slosh of wet mud under boots. Near as I can figure, it was the blood that got the tree's attention. I mean, Molly and I had skinned knees and elbows plenty of times down in the grove. But not like Dominic or Mr. Framer. Molly and I had made damn sure the bottom of the ravine was sharp enough to cut. Shattered glass, bent nails, flecks of flint and shale, all mingled with rusty springs and ragged bits of metal. The grove didn't disappear any of it. If anything, it seemed to welcome the junk, bristling like an old porcupine hidden among the brush. After Framer was gone, we took his keys and car, then sold his house. I thought for sure we'd be caught, but all we had to do was write our names on the deed. People would accept any lie, no matter how wild. You could almost see their minds working, like ocean waves piling sand into a hole on the beach. Everything just sorta filled in. I know what you're thinking, but it wasn't like that. We were heroes, you see. Molly would search online for targets, rapists, child molesters, murderers who got off on a technicality. We'd track them down, get them drunk or high, then bring them home for the grove. Whether they were guilty or not, it was damning enough evidence they were willing to go home with 2 underage girls. We kept their stuff, sold their places, emptied their accounts. Some of it we kept, but most went to charity. That was my idea, by the way. After a while, we had enough to cover college. Law for Molly, creative writing for me. It wasn't that I dreamed of writing the great American novel or anything. I just liked the way stories came together. How characters could seem like real people even though they were just words on a page. In a way, it was kind of like the opposite of what Molly and I did. One time we erased this slumlord who was trying to evict a bunch of tenants so he could jack up the price and rent the houses to college kids. He fought harder than most, tearing up big fistfuls of ivy even as the roots coiled around his arms. I thought he might rip free, until Molly cracked his head open with a rock. Afterward, we signed the houses over to his tenants. They didn't realize anything had changed, but I bet they'd be grateful if they had. I probably should have paid more attention, but I had classes to worry about, and papers, and tests, and spring vacation in Cancun. Romance, too, although I never could seem to find anyone worth more than a few dates. Molly did all the research. She was my sister. I trusted her. Besides, she was getting ready for law school while I was writing my 4th C+ retelling of Paradise Lost. If Molly said some tech bro in a Saint Laurent fedora and $2,000 shoes had jacked drug prices and defrauded needy people out of millions, who was I to argue? I think it was when the police showed up at the house that I really started to wonder. We grabbed a guy, it was almost always a guy, Molly said had skipped on a hit-and-run conviction. Something to do with the police messing up the chain of custody or something. It was all by the numbers. Molly picked him up at a bar, then spiked his beer, while I pulled the car around. Who's going to bother 2 girls helping a drunk shitbag out of a bar? Even if they did, they'd forget all about it once the Grove was through with him. We'd be free and clear, unless someone called the cops right away. Well, this shitbag had a wife and kids. Apparently, this wasn't his first time stepping out, so she'd hired a detective to trail him and gather ammunition for the divorce. Anyway, the detective followed us home just in time to catch a big old eyeful of Molly smashing our date over the head with a tire iron. We'd barely gotten him into the Grove when the sirens started up. Molly ran up to the house to handle things, future lawyer, remember? While I rolled the shitbag down into the ravine. I could hear him crashing around down there, in the nails and broken glass. Then came the familiar slithery hiss of ivy wrapping around his legs. Cars squealed up outside, lights flashing. I heard our front door bang open, then Molly shouting something about warrants and unlawful searches. Down in the ravine, the roots were just starting to crackle. From experience, I knew it'd be another 30 seconds or so before the Grove had him all the way down. More if he struggled, and the shitbag was starting to struggle. Someone yelled at the police to check the woods behind the house. It was about 15 feet down into the ravine. I knew better than to go down while the trees were erasing someone, so I grabbed the heaviest rock I could lift and heaved it down into the pit. I was aiming for the shitbag's head, but the rock hit him in the shoulder. Fortunately, it was heavy enough to break bone, and I guess the shock finally quieted him down. One of the police screamed at me to turn around with my hands up. By the time I did, he had no goddamned idea why he was at my house. The thing is, neither did Molly. See, you gotta be down there to watch the trees erase someone. Otherwise, they're gone for you just like everyone else. I mean, Molly put it together pretty quick. The cops were a big giveaway, but she had no idea who we'd erased. After we'd sent the cops home with waves and cups of coffee, Molly started asking all sorts of questions. Mostly normal stuff like, did I know anything about the guy? Where did we find him? How did we pick him up? But then she started getting really personal, like, had I ever seen him before? I hadn't. Or if I'd been messing around on her computer. I had, but mostly to cruise fanfic sites. I didn't really know much, but the way she kept at it just didn't sit right with me. So I checked up on the shitbag. It wasn't hard. I had his wallet, his car, his address, pictures of his family, everything. More, I was the only one who could see all the broken pieces his impending messy divorce would have left behind. The guy was obviously a cheater, but there was no mention of a hit and run anywhere. I honestly couldn't figure out why Molly had wanted to erase him, until I cracked his phone password and found pictures of the two of them together. Not gonna lie, that was tough. Not just because I'd trusted Molly, but because I'd convinced myself we were rewriting stuff for a good cause, that the world was better off without these horrible people in it. Granted, cheating on your wife and kids is pretty bad, but was it worth being edited out of existence? The worst part was realizing that if Molly had lied about one shitbag, she'd probably lied about plenty more. I'd never been as smart as my sister, but it didn't take a genius to start piecing things together. Like how I'd never had a long-term relationship, or even a serious friend, or how our house had always seemed bigger on the outside than on the inside, or how we'd never gotten an electric bill or made a mortgage payment. Molly and I had grown up all alone. 2 little girls going to school, buying groceries, just sort of skidding across the edges of realization. I couldn't believe no one had ever thought to check up on us. Turns out, we weren't heroes after all. Any other time, Molly would have figured me out in a second. But we were seniors, and she had finals, law school applications, an undergraduate thesis. A creative writing major might not carry the weight of a law degree, but it did mean I could turn in my papers early and spend the last week of the semester thinking about how I could make things right. We were celebrating out on the back porch. Steaks, Dom Perignon, and enough shrimp cocktail to choke a horse. Molly had aced her finals, of course, just gotten her acceptance letter from Moritz. She could have probably gone to Harvard or Columbia, but she wanted to stay close to home, of course. I waited until we were midway through the second bottle before I set my fork down and let my shoulders sag. When did you kill our parents? To her credit, Molly didn't even try to lie. She just looked at me, her eyes sadder than I'd ever seen them. Everything happened pretty quick after that. Molly threw her champagne in my face. While I was still sputtering, she snatched up the bottle and cracked me a good one on the side of the head. In the movies, the bottle always breaks, but this one didn't. So she was able to hit me a few more times before I could get my hands up. Everything went weird after that, like still frames lined up one after another. I felt the brick of the patio against my cheek, heard the scrape of the back gate. Molly's shadow stretched out across the grass as she grabbed my feet and started to drag me across the yard. I tried to kick free, but my legs felt all loose and fuzzy.
It didn't have to be this way.
Molly's eyes glinted silver in the porch light, her cheeks wet with actual tears. All these years, and I don't think I'd ever seen Molly cry. I clawed at the ground, pulling up hunks of wet grass, dirt under my fingernails. There was nothing to hang on to. Nothing before the grove. There was no breeze, but still I heard the trees creak, branches stretching like hungry hands, shivering in anticipation. It didn't matter that I'd fed it well over the years. The grove made no distinctions. Just before the edge, Molly's ankle rolled in the grass. She shook her head, blinking. Her grip slackened and I was able to tug my leg free. I gave her a kick just for good measure, and she stumbled on wobbly legs, swiping at me with arms gone feeble and awkward.
What did you do to me?
Molly went down on one knee, the heel of one hand pressed to her eye, as if to ward off a migraine. It didn't have to be this way. I slowly pushed to my feet, testing each leg before I put weight on it. I had plenty enough time. From experience, I knew the drugs I'd slipped into Molly's champagne would last for hours.
Wait.
Her voice was slurred, but there was a real panic in it now.
Where's sisters? Where's sisters, Mel?
But I was beyond listening. I made myself watch the grove murder her. Through tear-blurred eyes, I saw the vines thread her fingers, slipping almost tenderly between meat, sinew, and bone. For a moment, the roots lifted my sister up, like a child presenting a participation trophy. All the while, Molly held my gaze, not calling out, not struggling even as the trees began to draw her down into the cold, stony soil. I wanted to say I saw something approaching relief in her eyes, there at the end, but that would be a lie. Now I'm just waiting for the end of summer, The long, dry days when the grass turns brown and the leaves crackle like old paper. Then I'll tip a few cans of gasoline down into the ravine and try to turn the grove into a proper pyre. It's the least I can do for all the people we buried down there. Until then, it's just me. Well, me and this story. That's all Molly is now. I suppose that's all any of us are in the end. The folks we fed to the grove just got there quicker. It's actually kind of comforting to think of us all as just bumbling through life, thinking our story is the one that matters. June bugs bumping against the lid of a mason jar. Meanwhile, the world just shrugs and moves on, erasing us all in turn. You may have met the people Molly and I killed, passed them on the street, gone to class together. You may have even been close, may have even been family. But now, they're nothing more than words on a page. Soon enough, I will be too.
Babe Ruth is remembered as one of the greatest players of all time, despite striking out more often than he got on base. He actually held a record for strikeouts that would last for 30 years. This isn't why he's remembered, of course. If that were the case, then he would be little more than a mildly interesting footnote in baseball history, an otherwise forgettable bench warmer. Instead, we remember the Babe as the Sultan of SWAT, because when he did manage to connect wood with leather, you better believe that ball was going into the stands. One of the most memorable moments of the Babe's career took place in the third game of the 1932 World Series against the Cubs. During the game, both the players and the fans from the Chicago side were giving him a hard time. This was near the end of the Bambino's career, so many people considered him to be worn out and washed up. Just a has-been. At bat in the fifth inning, he was 2 strikes down. The Cubs dugout was really ribbing on Babe. They probably thought that if they could get under his skin, that they could break his concentration. The odds were already in their favor that Babe would strike out. Even in his best days, that would be the safe bet. So why expect anything less from the has-been whose best days were behind him? That's when Babe pointed towards the stands. Now, it's debated exactly who or what he was pointing at. He might have been pointing at center field, the pitcher, or at the Cubs' dugout. But the most popular theory, what I believe, is that he was showing exactly where he was going to put that ball. 2 strikes down, a tie score, and the entire city of Chicago against him. It would have been easy for the Babe to give up. Instead, he swung. And wouldn't you know it, he sent that sucker flying over 440 feet into the stands, right in the direction he indicated. That was the most memorable single swing in baseball history. The Yankees would go on to win the game 7-5. I'm telling you all of this to understand why I have to do what I'm going to do. I'm never going to have the opportunity to become a has-been like the Babe. To be a has-been, first, you have to be. Me? I'm a never will be. But that's not going to stop me from taking my swing. I woke up this morning just after 4 a.m. Normally, I'll sleep in until at least 10 in the morning on the weekend. Even then, it took my mom yelling at me at least 3 times before I finally dragged myself out of bed. But with my big swing coming up this evening, my body was like a coiled spring. I didn't even need an alarm to wake up. 1 minute I was dead asleep, and the next I was so awake that I felt like I pounded an entire 6-pack of Mountain Dew. I jumped out of bed. Everything was already set out where I placed it the night before. First, I changed from my pajamas into my Yankees Little League uniform. Next, I collected my Louisville Slugger and my school backpack that I had stuffed with every ball I owned. With everything I needed for my plan, I sneaked out of my room. Never before had I felt more tuned in to the world around me than at that moment. Even my night vision seemed cranked up to 11. The hallway that normally looked nearly pitch black during so many nighttime bathroom trips now looked just a bit dim. For my plan to work, I needed to be quiet as a ninja. Sound was the enemy. Normally, I probably would have stepped on at least one of the loose hallway floorboards. But on that night, I tiptoed around each like I had psychic powers or something. As I neared the end of the hallway, I froze. I could see the soft glow of the television on in the living room. I recognized the audio from the home movie of my 8th birthday party 5 years ago. Under this, there was another, softer sound. I had to listen for a moment before I realized it was Mom crying. I turned the corner of the hallway toward the back door and away from the living room. Before I went to bed, I had made sure to leave the deadbolt unlocked. It makes a loud thunk when it was turned that I couldn't afford. My hope was that my dad hadn't discovered it and locked it after I went to bed. But luck continued to be in my favor, and I found it as I left it. Outside, the summer night air was comfortably warm. The cloudless sky over me showed more stars than I ever remembered seeing. It looked like glitter spread over a black velvet cloth. From the tall grass, insects sang their final lullaby to the world. It would have been the perfect night, if not for the distant sound of screaming. The boom of an explosion made me look around. I decided it was far enough away that I probably didn't have to worry about it. The sound came from the direction of the city, and my destination was in the woods. It was a 10-minute walk down the well-worn path, starting at my backyard to the clearing in the forest. Once there, I turned my backpack upside down, and the dozen or so old, weathered baseballs tumbled onto the wet grass. I snatched one up and put my bat on my shoulder. If I had one regret at that moment, it's that I didn't have anyone to pitch to me. I asked Aaron, but he said he wasn't allowed to leave his family's shelter. So, I threw the balls into the air and swung at them as they came down. It was pretty awkward to do it like that, so I didn't hit as much as I would have with a proper pitcher. Plus, my goal was height rather than distance. This is what's usually called a pop fly, and batters try to avoid it. So to do it on purpose was a bit of an adjustment. But I reminded myself that when my big swing came up, that I would have a much easier target. All I really needed to do was to swing and swing hard. Whenever I did manage a hit, I would have to run out into the field, find the ball, and bring it back to the pile beside the old hubcap that I used as home plate. I repeated this process for the remainder of the night, only finally stopping when the orange glow of morning peeked over the tops of the trees. Realizing that my family would be worried if I didn't get back, I gathered up all of my balls and took the path back home. I didn't bother stealthily walking in the back door. There was no need. With the sounds coming from the kitchen, I could tell everyone was already up. Walking in, I found Dad and my older brother Bill already sitting at the table. Mom was at the stove. The trembling cigarette in her hand made me feel sad. She had quit 2 years ago, and to see her just throw all that hard work away was a disappointment. Dad and Bill weren't setting any better of an example. Dad had a bottle of whiskey that he was pouring into his number one dad coffee mug. Bill had his feet up on the table as he took a hit off of a joint. It was never a secret that Bill smoked pot. We would smell it coming off of his clothes when he came home on Saturday nights. However, there was something of an unspoken agreement between him and our parents that he was never to bring it into the house. But everything was different now, wasn't it?
Where were you?
Mom's words were just below a shout. From the lines running down her cheeks, I could tell that she had been crying. I sat down at my usual spot at the table. The breakfast piled before me dwarfed Thanksgiving dinner, and on the stove, I saw that Mom still had all 4 burners going and an electric griddle on the side. There were stacks of pancakes, piles of sausage, bacon, sirloin steaks, eggs, and fruit. A bowl that we usually used for popcorn was filled past overflowing with hash browns. There were gallons of milk, OJ, and cans of soda of all kinds. Mom never let us drink soda for breakfast.
Just out hitting balls in the woods?
There was no reason for me to lie anymore. Mom sighed. She stubbed out her cigarette and picked up the pack on the counter to fetch a new one. But her hands shook so bad that she dropped the first and needed to grab another.
It's just... you need to stay inside. We all need to stay inside. You need to be with your family when...
What about my big game?
I didn't look up as I filled my plate with the in-home buffet. Up until that point, Bill had a leg propped up on the table. Another thing he would have never been allowed to do before everything changed. But now, he brought it down so hard that he stomped on the linoleum tile.
What the...
Bill tried to speak, but with his lungs full of smoke, it came out as a croak. He spent a good minute coughing and trying to catch his breath before he could finish his thought.
What the fuck is wrong with you? There is no game. There will never be another game. You know that, right? How many times do we have to tell you this?
When it happens, I need to swing.
Why? What difference does it make, huh?
Bill grabbed me by the front of my jersey. His right arm pulled back and tensed like he was getting ready to punch me. Dad leaned forward and put a hand on Bill's shoulder. He didn't say a word. He only grunted and shook his head, then went back to staring down at his mug full of alcohol. Bill shoved me away. He wrapped an arm over his eyes and started to sob. Dropping the spatula onto the floor, Mom rushed over to Bill and wrapped him in a hug. Dad didn't stand up from his seat, but reached over and placed a hand on Bill's back.
Please, John. Please just promise that you will be with us when it happens.
Mom looked at me with pleading eyes as she held my brother. After breakfast, we all gathered in the living room to watch Pixar movies. Mom made popcorn and offered us bowls of ice cream. Though, after the gigantic breakfast we had, no one did more than pick at the snacks. Near the end of the last movie, Dad stepped out of the living room for a few minutes. He returned with the orange box that the man from the government had dropped off. Mom became stiff as a piece of wood. She refused to acknowledge the box. Maybe she thought if she didn't look at it, that it and its awful contents would go away. Dad fumbled with opening it up. By this point, he was most of the way through his bottle. It was the first time that I'd ever seen him drunk. I've seen him tipsy, sure. 4 beers at a cookout, sure. But never before had I seen him stumbling as he walked or slurring his words. After he worked the box open, he pulled 4 orange tubes and lined them up on the coffee table, like they were soldiers with a grim mission. On the side of each was that kind of tiny text that you see on boxes of medication. But what was most obvious was the skull and crossbones inside of a triangle above that text. Mom turned off the TV after the credits.
I'll put on some music.
She walked over to the stereo like she was in a daze and looked through the rack. She popped in a CD, and light classical music came from the speakers.
I was hoping for some Slayer. But yeah, this'll do.
Bill made an empty sound that I think was a laugh, but it sounded more like air escaping the lungs of a corpse.
So, how do we want to do this? Should I do everyone? Or should everyone do themselves?
Despite slurring over his words, Dad's expression was stone sober. I stood up.
I don't want to. I already told you that I have a game today.
I turned to walk to my room to get my equipment when I felt a hand lock onto my forearm and yank me back. I turned to see Bill holding on to me.
Let me go, Bill!
I tried to pull away, but the 3 years in age and the 1.5 feet in height that he had on me made all the difference. Bill pulled me down into his lap and wrapped both arms around me in a bear hug.
I'll get John. You and Mom can decide what you're doing.
Dad nodded. After taking one last drink from his bottle of whiskey, he picked up one of the tubes. With shaking hands, it was placed on the side of his neck. His thumb depressed a button. It made a hissing sound, almost like when you open a can of soda, except quieter. Dad set the tube down and picked up the second. Mom was crying again, but she did her best to hold it in. She just kind of hitched, like she had the hiccups. Leaning forward, she brushed her hair away from her neck. Dad leaned in and kissed it. Then he placed the tube to her neck and pressed the button. While all of this was going on, Bill held me across the chest with one arm. With his free hand, he snatched up the 2 remaining tubes.
Chill out. Just chill out.
Bill's lips were right up against my ear.
Just wait.
The first tube he put into the side of his neck. Then, almost as an afterthought, he pressed the button and tossed it away.
No! Stop! I don't want this, Bill! Please!
I fought to get away. Bill threw me to the ground and climbed on top of me. I punched and thrashed. He barely took notice. It was like hitting a bag of sand. I tried to sit up, but Bill grabbed my neck and forced me back down hard enough that my head bounced off the carpet. He held up the orange tube in a way that made me think of a hero getting ready to stake a vampire in a horror movie. He swung it toward my neck. I'll never be able to thank Bill enough for what he did next. The end of the tube came down at my neck, but at the last second, diverted to the fleshy webbing between the finger and thumb of his hand, holding me down. When he pressed the button on the end, the syringe inside the tube delivered its dose into Bill rather than me. Bill leaned in, whispered to me again.
Just wait. Do it for Mom. After you can go. Knock it out of the park for me.
Bill fell off me and spoke out loud.
See? That wasn't so bad.
Sitting up, I saw that Dad was holding on to Mom on the couch.
Come over here with Mommy and Daddy.
Mom held her arms out to Bill and me. We both walked to her, but Bill stumbled part way.
Shit. Dizzy.
I don't feel anything yet.
Mom looked to Bill, then Dad. Dad shrugged.
Maybe it affects some people faster than others.
I helped Bill to his feet and let him lean on me as we walked over to the couch. Mom pulled me onto her lap like she used to do when I was younger. I felt silly being 13 years old and sitting on my mom's lap. But it made her feel better, so I didn't complain. Bill snuggled in and rested his head on her shoulder.
Feel tired.
Bill slurred his words more than Dad, who had nearly an entire bottle of whiskey in him. Mom kissed Bill's forehead and held him.
Shh. Just close your eyes, baby.
We sat there clinging to one another in silence. Bill stopped breathing first. After that, Mom. And finally, Dad. I did my best to mimic the effects of the drug during the process to not give away Bill's ruse. I think I sat on Mom's lap for close to an hour. When I was sure that the awful process was over, I reached up a quivering hand and shook Dad's shoulder. The skin there was like touching a block of clay. When he didn't respond, I shook him again. This time, he just slumped over, his eyes staring at nothing. Sliding out from beneath the dead weight of Mom's embrace, I stood in front of my motionless family for maybe 10 minutes. I watched them. Never before have I had a panic attack, but from the basement of my stomach, an icy feeling of pain and despair clawed its way up. I knew if I allowed it to take over and gave in to that fear, that I would never leave this living room. I put both hands over my face and wept as quietly as I could. At that moment, I did consider staying there and being with them when it happened, just like Mom wanted. What happened next, I know, was just my imagination, but I could swear that I felt a large, calloused hand rest on my shoulder. The hand of a man who spent his life with his hands wrapped around a piece of maple. The hand of a man who, when everyone thought he was washed up, swung those hands anyway.
Swing!
A rough voice spoke in my head. I sucked in a sob and nodded. I might be and never will be, but I at least had to make the swing. Glancing down at my watch, I saw I might have just enough time to get to the ball field if I hauled ass. I ran to my bedroom, shoved the baseball bat into my backpack, and slung it over my shoulder. This time, I didn't bother bringing the balls. I didn't need them. I was going to swing at something much larger. I ran into the garage. On pure muscle memory, my hand slapped the button to open the automatic door. I jumped on my bicycle and threw my weight onto the foot pedal. After I tore out of my driveway, I didn't even bother to close the garage door behind me. It would have been pointless. I had no intention of ever returning. It had been nearly a month since I'd been anywhere other than my house or the woods behind it. The city I grew up in looked like the reports on the news from countries devastated by war. Houses were burned down. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the street. A house at the end of my block had dead bodies hanging from ropes beneath a maple tree. In front of this was a sign that read, "Looters will be shot." At one point, I passed a naked man on the street who had a burning Molotov in each hand. An insane smile crossed his face when we made eye contact. He threw one of the flaming bottles at me. I swerved around it as it exploded in the street, sending broken glass and burning gasoline everywhere. The heat from it was enough to singe the ends of my hair. I continued on without looking back. Going past a church, a preacher stood on the roof. It was difficult to hear what he was saying over the whine of feedback as he shouted into the microphone. The only words I could make out were, "The Day of Judgment." In the lawn, there were rows of motionless forms beneath clean white sheets. They were arranged as orderly as a military graveyard. I pushed on. I did my best not to become distracted by anything that wasn't directly between me and my goal. When I saw the sign for Beauregard Memorial Park, I turned hard enough that my bike threw up dirt and small stones as I skidded around the bend. My legs screamed at me from the effort of pumping them harder and longer than I ever had before. It didn't matter. I didn't need my legs, as long as I could swing a bat. First, I passed by the community pool, followed by the duck pond. Just past the pond was my goal, the diamond where I would take my swing. In the parking lot of the ball field, I squeezed the bike's brakes. But I was going too fast, and I squeezed too hard. The bike twisted out from under me. It stopped moving. I kept going. On reflex, I threw my hands out between myself and the pavement rushing up to greet me. It felt like I slid 100 feet, when really it wasn't more than 2 or 3. On a normal day, a spill like that probably would have had me running home crying. But things were different now. I picked pieces of jagged gravel and small glass bits out of my bleeding hands. My palms and right forearm were scraped to hell. Steady rivers of blood ran down my arms and fell onto the pavement in fat drops. It looked worse than it was. Nothing was broken anyway. Just a scrape, I told myself. I could still hold a bat. Tearing the backpack off, I retrieved my Louisville Slugger. Testing my grip on it resulted in a burning, tearing sensation. It was uncomfortable, but my grasp was firm. The dirty gray tape on the handle soaked up the blood and still gave a nice, tight grip. I walked out onto the field and into the batter's box. I've stood by this same plate going back to when I was first allowed to join a t-ball team. All of those times, the field was filled with cheering parents and jeering opponents. Now, the only thing I hear is the blowing of the wind and the distant muffled sound of a preacher shouting on a rooftop. They say when Babe Ruth pointed, that the stadium went quiet. Even his opponents shut up. I point now at my opponent. Not to the vacant pitcher's mound, the empty dugouts, or even the unoccupied center field. I point at the sky. It's a beautiful July summer day. Warm, but not humid. Not a cloud in the sky. You couldn't ask for a more perfect day for baseball. But in the clear blue sky, the bright sun now shares its space with a smaller and almost equally bright twin, the meteorite Thanatos. Though some people have called it wormwood or revelation, an astronomer discovered it 2 years ago. The governments did their best to hide it from the world as long as they could, but eventually, every amateur astronomer was able to spot the bright new star in the sky. It's over 3 times the size of the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs. The experts on the news estimated that it would kill 99.8% of all life on Earth. I remember when I first saw the 3D model of it on the news that I didn't feel as scared as I knew that I should be. My first thought was how the off-white and nearly spherical rock looked like a baseball. I had a lot of plans for my life. I was going to get on the high school varsity baseball team. Eventually, I'd catch the attention of scouts and get a free ride through college. Right out of college, I'd be picked up by the Yankees, then go to the World Series. I was going to be someone. But now, because of a damn space rock, I'm a never will be. So I'm standing here, at home plate. The light in the sky is getting bigger. I have a plan. I know it's stupid and impossible. My family thought I lost my mind, that I'm in denial. But I know what the outcome will be. I know there is nothing I can do to stop this. But there is one thing that I can do. I can swing.
Brace yourself for the No Sleep Podcast. It's the No Sleep Podcast, Aiken for 18, Volume 2. I'm your host, David Cummings. As the ache continues for Season 18, we have a couple of stories for you this week. They were released to our Season Pass 17 members, but now you get to enjoy their dark delights. And speaking of Season Passes, the pre-orders for Season Pass 18 are now online. All you have to do is go to seasonpass.thenosleeppodcast.com and sign up for Season Pass 18. You get access to Season 18's 25 upcoming full-length episodes, each over 2 hours long, along with 3 exclusive bonus episodes. It's well over 66.6 hours of audio content for only $25. Season 18 premieres on June 26, and the next 2 weeks will feature Sleepless Decompositions episodes in the lead up to the new season. Sounds like everyone had better be fully braced, just like you need to brace yourself now as we dive into this episode. In our first tale, we go for a walk. Going for regular walks can really help one's mood. Let's say you've recently experienced a major life change. Maybe you've let yourself get trapped in your own head. Going out and getting some fresh air can be one helpful step to break out of that cycle. But in this tale, shared with us by author Jeff Wood, we discover that taking a pleasant stroll can soon take a dark turn if you notice that you're casting two shadows. Performing this tale is Peter Lewis. But hey, maybe it's nothing. It only happens outside this one specific house, after all. Don't worry about the other you and ignore that glint in the window. Surely it's just a trick of the light.
You're a heart attack waiting to happen, my doctor told me. After my wife died, my health began to suffer. My doctor told me if I didn't start getting some exercise, I was going to have some kind of coronary event. He's right. I'm in my early 40s. I'm pretty overweight. So I tried jogging at first. I couldn't even make it a block. 5 or 6 houses down the street, and I was bent over, hands on my knees, wheezing. These pains shot through my lower legs like my muscles were tearing off my bones. Later, the doctor told me it was, shin splints. I started walking. The neighborhood I live in is an upper-middle-class subdivision in the suburbs of Denver. The streets are wide and well-maintained. Few cars are parked on the street, most of them tucked away in the 2-car garages and expansive driveways of their respective houses. Several schools are spread out through the area, all with nice green campuses, modern playgrounds, football fields, tennis courts. We have 2 firehouses and 5 churches. The neighborhoods are all patrolled by tasteful HOAs. 5:30 every weekday afternoon, like clockwork, I come home from work, change into jogging pants and a tee, slip on my running shoes, grab my phone and a bottle of water, and head out the front door. I expected to be alone in my walks. Most people would be inside their homes or inside their cars, I assumed. I was wrong. It turns out lots of people are walkers and joggers, and a lot of them at that hour of the day, right after work and school. I've been lonely since my wife died. The human interaction helps, even at a distance. My route varies. The streets are not laid out on a grid, but weave through the landscape in curves and circles, streets unexpectedly ending in cul-de-sacs and roundabouts. As a result, getting from one place to another rarely involves taking a straight path. Nearly every day I walk by the shadow house. I don't try to. The geometry of the streets must somehow lead me there. I approach it from the same direction every time I pass, west to east. Since I walk at around the same time every day, the sun is always behind me, casting long shadows in front of me whenever I pass the house. So why do I call it the shadow house? Well, because of the shadow that walks beside me whenever I pass. When I turn the corner to enter the block, my shadow swings around in front of me, keeping me company as I walk, lengthening as the sun lowers into the sunset. As I pass the property line of the house, the place where the well-tended lawn of the house next door morphs into the weed-choked soil of the shadow house. Another shadow joins my own. One moment, my own shadow is stretched out before me, the shadow of my head bobbing along with the rhythm of my walk. The next moment, 2 shadows loom in front of me. 2 heads glide along the surface of the concrete in step to my gate. After I pass the property line on the far side of the house, the shadow disappears. The first few times this happened, I stopped immediately in front of the house and turned around to look behind me. No one was there. I saw no object that could have taken the space between the sun and the sidewalk. I assumed those first few times that it was the exercise. My body, unused to the exertion, was creating sights in my mind that did not exist in real life. I don't think that anymore. I came home wanting to tell my wife. She wasn't home, of course. She's been gone for nearly a year. It took me several moments to realize it. I started talking and then cut myself off, remembering. I keep forgetting she's not here anymore. Anyway, what is this shadow standing next to my own, showing itself only within the boundaries of this one house? Is the shadow there all the time and only shows itself when I pass this house? Or is the shadow specific to this house, this place? Is the shadow specific to me? I began to examine the house as I passed. Someone lived there. Mail sat in the mailbox, but not an unusually large amount. The lawn was unkempt, all weeds and cracked soil, but the weeds had been recently cut back. Drapes covered the windows. Lights could sometimes be seen in the rooms inside. No toys scattered on the lawn, no basketball hoops in the driveway. I've never seen anyone on the property, inside or outside. There may have been a car inside the garage, but never one parked outside. Something hung in the attic window. I couldn't tell what it was. Sunlight reflected off it. It could have been a prism or maybe a small pane of etched glass. It reminded me of these earrings my wife used to wear. Someone gave them to her for Christmas 2 years ago. A friend, she told me. She used to wear them often. Which friend? I'd ask her. She never told me. I think I know who gave them to her, but I never asked. I kept my hypothesis to myself. After the earrings, I began serving her a glass of wine every night before supper. She never said no. In fact, she greeted it. She seemed flattered by the gesture. She drank the entire glass of wine I provided her every night, until the end. I tried to avoid the house after I first noticed the shadow and realized it was something more than a trick of the light. I found that even when I tried to avoid the house, I couldn't. The house was always there, along my path. I was certain nothing supernatural was to blame. It was just one of those abstractions I thought about as I walked, how the street plan within a subdivision could funnel foot traffic so that it required to pass a particular spot in order to travel from point A to point B. It's like a math problem, a mapping and geometry problem. A problem whose solution could be found through careful application of science and logic. So no, I never actually thought the house found me or even sought me. The vagaries of mathematics, civil engineering, and random chance colluded to put this house on my path every day I walked. I accepted it as an unavoidable daily occurrence. The shadow bounced to the same rhythm as my footsteps. Every time I took a step, and the shadow from my own body leaped forward, the other shadow leapt forward as well. We were like two friends whose gaits have synchronized. My wife and I used to walk together back in the good old days before the earrings. Back when I loved her and she loved me, and we lived together in our perfect little house. After we ate supper, after we put away the dishes, her washing, me drying, we'd walk the neighborhood together, hand in hand as the sun set. We even passed this house. More than once. I remember her pace slowing as we neared it the first time. I remember her head turning to look in the windows as we passed. I asked her what she was looking for, but she didn't respond. It was as if she'd been there before. I accepted the shadow as part of the landscape of my daily walks, no different than the ceramic gnomes in the garden a few doors down from my house, the flags and political signs on the lawn across the street. I gave up trying to control my route and accepted that my path would always take me to the shadow house at some point during my walk. The shadow house rewarded me for my acceptance. Shadow House showed me my wife's earrings again, shining through the attic window every day as I took my walk. My wife was wearing them. My wife, who had been dead and buried for almost a year. I simply looked up at the attic window and saw her. The sunlight bouncing off the earrings caught my eye and drew it to the window. She stood there and watched me pass. She made it clear with the intensity of her gaze that she was focused on no one but me. I slowed, but did not stop. She held a glass of wine. She took a step closer to the window. She smiled thinly. Her head turned to track me as I passed. She watched as I walked past her for several weeks after that. Always her thin smile followed me. as her earrings danced in the sunlight. Always she held the glass of wine I'd given her. Always the shadow walked beside me as I passed. Sometimes glare from the sunlight prevented me from seeing her, but most days she waited on me as I waited on the sight of her, wearing the earrings, holding the wine. I knew why she held the wine glass. I wondered why she wore the earrings. She was not buried with them. The funeral home had dressed her in the earrings when they prepared the body, but I insisted the earrings be taken off her ears. I took them, put them in my pocket. I was sure I'd thrown them away later that night. Clearly I'd forgotten to. I didn't quit my walks after I spied my dead wife in the attic window. In fact, the sight made me more resolute to continue my exercises. One day, while passing the house, my eyes dropped from the empty window frame to the door below. The door was open. The door had never been open before. Twin shadows slung to my left as I turned and walked up the crooked path of stepping stones that led to the porch. I stepped up to the threshold of the door, shielded my eyes with the palm of my hand, and looked inside. The shadowed rooms beyond the doorway were sparsely filled with furniture. A couch hulking in the center of a room, a chair hiding in the corner. No paintings or posters adorned the walls, no carpet or rugs protected the hardwood floor. Candlelight flickered from distant rooms. I entered the house blinking with the change of light. A staircase to my right led to the next floor, and I instinctively took it. Chalk drawings, faded with time, tattooed the steps of the stairs. Crude drawings I could not decipher, scribbled characters that seemed like letters of a foreign alphabet. As I stepped off the stairway and onto the landing, the figures trailed off down a hallway and toward a smaller door tucked modestly into an alcove in the wall. I followed the figures, walking past cracked hallway walls to a door that opened onto a set of boxy, workmanlike stairs. I knew before I mounted them where they led. I walked up the steps to an unfinished attic. Rafters leapt from timber to timber overhead. Simple 2x4s framed the walls. A tumble of boxes sat hunched together in the dust of the corners. Sunlight spilled in from the window at the far end of the attic. My wife had watched me from that window. She was not there now. I walked towards the window. My feet stamped prints into the dust on the floor. I reached the glass and noticed my late wife's earrings sitting on the dusty sill. I recalled immediately the gentle manner in which she had set them down on her bedside table every night. I think she left them to keep me company. I hope so. I miss her. I looked out the glass of the window. My motionless body lay on the sidewalk below, blood soaking into the concrete beneath my head. 3 neighbors approached my body. One had a cell phone and was dialing 911. The other 2 discussed seeing me clutch my hands to my chest, falling forward so abruptly it looked as though I'd been pushed. It looked like a heart attack, they were telling each other. My doctor was right. I was a heart attack waiting to happen. The police came. An ambulance came, and then the coroner. I don't know where my wife went. She's not at the window. She's not in the house anymore. It's some sort of trick, you know. She must have cast some sort of spell, because I am in the house now. I live here. I've tried to leave. I can't. I watch the people as they pass, walking or jogging or biking or driving by, and I trace their paths with greedy eyes and a thin smile. I wonder where they go when they leave my eyesight. I'll look for you to walk past me. Look for me? A trick of the light from the attic window, a silhouette cast on the sidewalk. When you see me, you'll know I am the shadow that walks beside you.
In our final tale, we meet a man going through one of life's toughest challenges. His friend Neil has a new girlfriend, and it's severely reducing their number of boys' nights out. Thankfully, a traveling attraction has rolled up which all three of them can attend together. But in this tale, shared with us by author Jack Thackwell, this potential third wheel situation might just drive their friends to their doom. Performing this tale are David Alt, James Cleveland, Penny Scott Andrews, Andy Cresswell, and Erica Sanderson. So enjoy the sights, sounds, and smells. Let loose and have fun. But don't do anything that might leave you with regrets if you reflect on that one time when the fair came to town.
It was Friday when they started to set up the carnival. It was open the next night. That seems odd to me now. All those tents and rides, it should have taken them days, not hours. Nothing that big takes just hours to prepare. But at the time I thought, maybe they were just that good. We went that Saturday. Me, Neil, and his girlfriend Mel. It was a big thing for me. It was rare that I could get Neil out since he'd hooked up with Mel. They were a clingy, in-your-face pair ever since they'd met. The funfair, though, that had tempted him, even if I did have to do a bit of cajoling over the phone.
Oh, come on. We always used to go to these things.
I don't know, mate. Me and Mel were just thinking about staying in with a curry, watching a film.
Like you did last Friday, you mean?
Was it fair to use that against him? Maybe. Most likely not. You can tell me, oh, it's different when you have someone, and maybe it is, but you have to remember where you came from and who got you there. I'd heard him breathe out a heavy sigh that crackled down the line. I knew I'd got him.
Oh, go on. You can win her a teddy at the air rifles and be a hero.
That was the tipping point. There'd been one more moment of silence, and then...
All right, we'll meet you there.
When we arrived, it all seemed standard. Hooker duck stalls, ring toss pavilions, familiar old roller coasters smelling of sawdusted vomit. The way Neil kept all his attention on Mel, leaving me to walk behind them, made me face the sudden realization that this would probably be the last time we would meet up. It made me sad to think of that, but right there in the warm night breeze, surrounded by the glow of the rides, it felt bittersweet. One final go-around. The interesting thing about this fair were the less-than-standard attractions. Those really were amazing and out of place. The freak show in its red velvet tent, the fortune teller who beckoned us on with a crooked finger as she sat in her glass box that smelled of rot, the giant boa constrictor in its cage cordoned off by thick steel chains. This part of the fair was older, like something from a Victorian nightmare. One of the exhibits must have caught Neil's eye because he gasped and pried his hand away from Mel's grip before darting off, leaving me and her alone. I shot her a forced smile. She pursed her lips and looked away. Soon we saw Neil's waving arms. He was standing outside a large plywood shack. It was squat and rectangular with flaking black and red paint. It looked like it had been worn away over many years. It had 2 doors set into the wood, one marked in, one marked out. In stark golden letters above the doors were the words, Pickman's House of Horrors.
This looks great.
Does it?
Mel frowned.
I'm not getting that vibe. It smells like seawater.
Yeah, she's right. The good horror attractions always have some decoration on the outside. A severed head here, a clown mask there, and a rubber bat or two. I mean, this one's pretty plain. Neil just doubled down.
That's what makes this one so unique. They don't put anything on the outside because all the best bits are on the inside.
He grinned.
Seriously, look at the rest of the shit around here. This is pre-political correctness. Fuck knows what's in there, or how far they take it.
I was about to question his logic when a small man appeared from around the corner of the building. He was dressed in a red velvet jacket fraying at the cuffs and hem, and a straw boater. He seemed to carry with him the long-dead smell of fried food and, faintly, something metallic. When he grinned wide.
That is a fine observation, my good man. A very fine observation indeed.
Are you Mr. Pickman?
In the flesh.
The small man took a bow, nearly sending his boater tumbling to the ground.
And as your handsome friend there said, the very best of what is in store for you is kept within these walls. Evil I dare not name awaits you in Pickman's House of Horrors.
He had a face like a goblin out of a storybook. I wasn't sure if there was something wrong with him or he was just old, but I couldn't help but feel uneasy.
Well, I'm sold already.
Neil beamed. Mel frowned and tugged on his hand.
I thought we'd go to one of the stalls and see if you could win me a prize.
We will. Let's just do this first. After that, I'll play till I win you one of those big bears.
That seemed to pacify her. I was less easily convinced. Something didn't feel right about Mr. Pickman or his House of Horrors. It was like he was in the wrong place in some way, like he wasn't a carny, like he wasn't faking. All the other scares around there were modern, fluorescent masks and day-glow plastic. Not him. How much is it? I thought the cost might put Neil off.
For the price of but £1, you will gain entry to this marvellous attraction, a remnant of a bygone era when carnivals were the pride of this great land of ours.
It sounded like he'd rehearsed this in a mirror and long since lost enthusiasm for what he was saying. Neil was already fishing around in his pocket for a £1 coin. He looked pointedly at Mel and she rolled her eyes before doing the same. I groaned and pulled a £5 note from my pocket. Can you make change for this?
Certainly, sir.
Pickman's eyes grew wide as he saw the note. He smiled before clicking out £4 coins from a coin dispenser on his belt. We waited expectantly as Mr. Pickman unlocked the door marked "In," revealing nothing but darkness.
Off you go.
That was the last thing Mel and Neil heard from him. I was bringing up the rear and caught some quieter words.
Just watch your fucking step.
It was a flash of truth behind the mask. Pickman the not-so-jolly. Pickman was happy to have got our money so he could go and buy himself a drink, that sort of thing. Oddly, it reassured me. He was just a huckster after all, nothing more sinister than that. We stepped inside and he shut the door, entombing us in darkness. A second later, dim electric bulbs flickered into life, and we were in a narrow corridor plastered with old-fashioned floral wallpaper, a sickly shade of arsenic green.
Well, this isn't very scary.
We'll give it a chance, Mel. We've only just got in.
Neil slipped his hand into hers. I saw Mel's fingers squeeze around his and assumed the atmosphere was getting to her more than she was letting on. We started to walk. The lights, yellowed with dust and the gunk accrued through years of being in one place, did little to brighten the corridor, and we could see no more than 3 feet in front of us. I began to feel a little claustrophobic. I imagined the ugly floral wallpaper pressing in on me as I walked, the plywood walls grinding and splintering against each other as they moved. At the end of the passage was a flight of spiral stairs. We stopped just before them and stared down into the stairwell.
This thing goes down? How could it possibly go down?
Wasn't there an army base here in the war? Maybe this is an old bomb shelter.
It's got to be.
Mel didn't know any more about it than I did, but it's good to agree with your boyfriend, and she clung on tighter to him. No, it didn't make sense. This was a pop-up attraction meant to be taken down, moved on to a new area and put back up. Maybe they got lucky with an old base this time, but that couldn't happen everywhere. Did they dig out new foundations each time? How could they? Neil grinned.
See? I knew this would be interesting.
So, who's going to go first?
The three of us had a short moment of silence where we each expected one of the others to volunteer.
Fine, I'll do it.
Neil began to descend the staircase, placing his hands against the wall to balance himself. I distinctly heard him mutter something mean-spirited under his breath. We followed him down, and the three of us came to another door. It looked like the way into a study. It was heavy and made of dark wood. Mel pushed it open, and we stepped into the room that lay beyond. It was very odd. All the surfaces were covered in dark black foam, and it was cut in half by a crisscross design of what looked like wire. On the far wall opposite us was a clock face, and underneath that, a second door. Well, that looks like where we need to get to. Neil walked across to the wire and made to pluck it, like you would a guitar string. It moved down a centimeter or two before twanging back into place and slicing off the tip of his finger.
Shit!
Blood welled up and dripped down between his knuckles.
It's like bloody razor wire.
There was a chime from somewhere I couldn't see, and the door behind us slammed shut and locked. I could see the clock on the wall in front of us, and I watched the minute hand begin to move. The wires across the room whirred, and a diamond-shaped gap appeared in the middle. It was big enough for a person to fit through, but only just, and even that was shrinking. I then understood where I'd seen the foam before and why the wires were moving closer together. It was soundproofing, like the kind used in recording studios. It was there to stop our movements making a sound, but some mechanism in the room was picking up on our voices, and it was our words that were making the gap small.
What the hell is happening?
The wires started to vibrate, and the gap shrunk by an inch. The big hand on the clock kept moving. I put my finger to my lips to try and shush the other two, but they didn't seem to understand.
This isn't right.
Mel was starting to jitter. The wires closed in again. In despair, I dropped my finger from my lips. Will you shut up? She looked at me in surprise, and I gestured to the wires as they moved even closer together. The gap was now the size of an open window. I checked the clock. 6. I didn't want to know what would happen when it reached 12. I approached the wires. They seemed to sparkle in the dim light of the room. I guessed they'd been coated in something to make them extra sharp, ground glass perhaps. I could see that they weren't so much vibrating as soaring backwards and forwards, making little slicing noises as they did. I tentatively lifted my right leg and passed it through the gap. I waited for the sharp sting of wires cutting through my jeans, but it never came, only the firmness of foam under my shoe on the other side. This made me confident. I stooped down and ducked my head under the gap. I was safe. I checked the clock. 8. Only 4 ticks left to get Neil and Mel across before... Before what? I waved to the other two and they hurried over to the gap. Mel was the first to try and cross. She stuck her head through and offered me her arms while Neil lifted her legs and shoved her through the remaining space. Her feet hit the foam with a soft thud before she picked herself up. Neil's turn. His finger was still bleeding and he sucked on it as he eyed up the space in the wire. My eyes caught the clock again. 9. When I looked back to my friend, I saw that he was preparing to try and launch himself through the hole. I moved my hands up to my chest and waved to show him that I thought that was a very bad idea. Of course, he didn't listen to me, he never fucking listened to me, and jumped anyway. He launched himself through the air, and to his credit, his torso did clear the gap. For a moment, it seemed like the gamble would pay off. That is, until the toe of his Converse got caught on the wire. There was a gristly sawing sound, and Neil came unstuck. He dropped to the foam and was followed a moment later by the last part of his foot. Neil's hand sprung to the clean cut of flesh that used to be the end of his foot. Blood pulsed out from under his fingers and soaked into the floor. I pulled off my jumper and ripped a sleeve from it. I tied that tightly around his foot, trying to stem the flow of blood. The clock struck 12 and the room boomed with the sound of chimes. As the sound was hungrily absorbed by the foam coverings, the wires shot across the other side of the room. Anyone who had been standing on the wrong side would have been minced finer than Wagyu beef. It didn't just go to where we'd been standing, it sort of danced around in it, making sure it got every inch. Pieces. We would have been sliced to pieces. Then the trap stopped soaring and came back to its original grid pattern, which we could now see had been made of 2 different layers. The silence was deafening. I reached out and gingerly touched the wire. Nothing happened. No gap formed again.
Well, we're not getting out that way.
What the hell just happened?
Neil grimaced. He was still clutching his foot, but the blood seemed to have stopped for the moment. Mel wiped sweat from her face.
Holy shit! That thing could have killed us!
Fuck that. It nearly did kill me. We've got to get out of here.
He tugged his phone from his back pocket.
I'm calling the police.
Mel did the same while I started to look around the room.
Shit, no service.
It became obvious that it wasn't just his network, but that we were trapped in some kind of dead space. Neither phone worked, no matter how hard they jabbed the buttons or how loudly they yelled abuse.
We've got to yell. Maybe someone will hear us.
It won't work. See that phone?
Yeah?
It's soundproofing, like in a recording studio. No one will be able to hear us, no matter how loud you scream.
What the fuck is going on?
Mel was starting to get panicky. I couldn't blame her, but I spoke as calmly as I could.
If Pickman put one of these traps into his house of horrors, I'm sure it won't be the only one. He's like that crazy guy, H.H. Holmes, and his murder castle.
Who?
Mel looked blank. I turned to Neil. He was glassy-eyed with pain, but he might remember the conversation we'd once had in the library about famous and fucked-up murders.
You know, the guy at the Chicago's World Fair? America's first serial killer? He used a bunch of contractors to build a block-sized hotel full of traps and chutes.
Neil shook his head.
The fuck is wrong with you? The shit you bring up.
Mel pulled us back to the situation at hand.
Couldn't this be the only one? The only trap? Maybe Mr. Pickman thought this one would kill us. Are you sure there'll be more?
Not a chance. If Pickman's anything like Holmes, he'd have had gas in here as well. A failsafe, something to make sure we didn't make it.
So, this is all some kind of sick game?
No, well, sort of. This is something important to Pickman. He needs this, but it has to be a certain way. He'll have specific rules. We just have to learn them and follow them.
Neil was hobbling to his feet.
There's only one way out of this place. Assuming we can get out at all, that is. And that means we have to keep going.
Mel helped Neil to stay upright and pulled his arms around her shoulder for support. He wasn't going to be much good at walking now, and there was a worrying paintbrush trail of blood behind us. Seemed my sleeve hadn't been as useful as I thought. I cautiously pushed the door open and waited. Nothing. I poked my head around the frame. Another corridor. The same as before, the same yellowing electric lights and ancient wallpaper, but this time it was shorter, and I could see all the way to the end where there was an old-fashioned elevator, the kind with the metal cage door and brass handles. I waved the other two on and shut the door behind us.
Watch where you step. We don't want any more nasty surprises.
We hobbled towards the elevator, staring at our feet, trying to spot any traps, but in the end we made it. No deadfalls, no punji sticks, no falling candelabras. We heaved Neil into the lift and leant him against the wall while we examined the buttons. At first, they gave me hope. Maybe I had been wrong when I said these wouldn't take us up to the outdoor. But then I took a second glance at the buttons. There were 2 floors, -1 and -2. The only way out was down. Mel looked at me. She knew. I shrugged by way of apology before pressing the dark button. The elevator jarred into life, and the door shut. It was from a time before Muzak, so we were left with the grinding of gears as we descended further into the earth. I leant back against the door and rubbed my face with my hands. Soon the lift shuddered and the sound of gears stopped. The door creaked open and we stepped through. Once again, we found ourselves in a corridor, but this time there was no illumination. We pulled Neil upright and began to haul him through the darkness, the only light being cast by a dingy bulb in the elevator, throwing slender mockeries of our shadows ahead of us along the walls. We hadn't taken more than 5 paces before the door to the elevator slid shut and descended, leaving us in total darkness.
What do we do now?
There's only one thing we can do. Keep going and hope there's a door at the end of this hallway. We started walking again, dragging Neil under his arms. I had the feeling that he wanted to say something, but before he could, there was a noise from beside us, a loud slamming. It made all 3 of us jump, and we nearly dropped Neil. I heard a slight sniffing noise, the kind a dog makes as it scents the air. Neil trembled over my shoulder.
What was that?
Just run. I began to power my feet into the floor, practically pulling the other 2 over in the process. That was when the noise started, a clacking like clawed feet on a hardwood floor. It was right behind as we ran. My heart nearly stopped when a harsh, panting voice joined it. I turned my head for an instant, still running, trying to catch a glimpse of the thing despite the dark. But I couldn't see anything apart from 2 flashes of red. The creature's eyes, which were full of joyous light as it chased us through the passageway. The thing babbled other words at us as we ran, but I couldn't hear them for the drumming in my ears. At last, we crashed into something solid and unforgiving, knocking us over. I heard a cry from Neil as he landed badly on his leg. We waited in the darkness, panting for the thing to begin its work, but it never did. Puzzled, I got up, pulling the other 2 with me. I faced the corridor, keeping an eye on those 2 bits of red light, and walked backward, slowly, my arm around Neil's waist. We moved until we found ourselves pressed against the solid surface we had run into. I wandered my free hand over its exterior. I could feel a grain and knew whatever it was made of wood. A few more moments of searching and my hand found something metal and round. A doorknob. I gripped it hard and turned. The door opened easily on greased hinges when pushed by our weight, flooding the hallway with light. As the beam of light widened, it lit everything in the corridor. The blank wooden walls, the scratched and stained floor. Even the creature standing no less than a foot from us. It was very small, its full height making it no taller than my waist. Its skin was grey and dead-looking. It had a matted beard of dark black hair and yellowed eyes. Its hands were gnarled and looked as powerful as pneumatic vices. Its fingers ended in long claw-like nails. The creature stared at us, standing in the doorway. It didn't move at first, it simply looked. It opened its mouth in a grin, giving us a good look at a set of yellow, gristle-flecked teeth, each as sharp as a surgical knife. The thing flicked out a long red tongue and slid it over these canines. That gesture said all it needed to. I'll be seeing you later. It darted to our right, disappearing through a wooden hatch. We heard it skittering away through the wall. Mel jumped when she heard that, and Neil almost fell.
What kind of thing was that?
I stabilized my friend, and he glared at Mel.
I don't know, and there's nothing we can do about it now. Come on, let's just get the fuck out of here.
The 3 of us turned around and headed into the new room. It was different from the last one. This one was circular with yellow painted walls. There was a heavy screen of dust in the air, and the current of the closing door sent it dancing through the beam of bright yellow bulbs fixed to the ceiling. There was an exit on the opposite side. I didn't need to try the handle to know that it was locked. I propped Neil in a sitting position against the wall and told Mel to look after him while I looked around the room.
What are we going to do?
You are going to stay calm, keep your heartbeat down. You lost a lot of blood in that corridor. Lose any more and you'll end up looking like that shriveled old husk Pikmin. I wagged a finger at him, trying to keep jovial. Mel nodded.
He's right. If you lose any more, you're going to start blacking out.
Neil began to grumble, but I'd already turned my attention back to the room. There had to be some way to open the door. My heart skipped a beat when I caught sight of a large pull grip dangling from the wall. It was one of the old ones, like you see in lavatories, with the long wooden bars inside a metal U which was attached to a chain that vanished into the yellow plasterwork of the wall.
Guys, I found something.
They looked up and noticed the chain. Their eyes lit up with hope.
What are you waiting for?
Yeah, pull it!
I reached out to pull the chain before taking my hand back. I remembered what had happened in the last room. We'd gotten lucky. The trap had been relatively easy and we'd gotten through more or less unharmed. What if we weren't so lucky this time?
Are you sure, guys? We don't know what'll happen. There might be another trap.
We made it through the one before in one piece, didn't we?
Mel hastily backtracked after a scowl from Neil.
I mean, we made it out alive.
Like it or not, if this could open the door, it was our only option. I sighed and gave the chain a sharp tug. It rattled and its links chanked as they slid from the wall before retracting and returning to its previous position. There was a sudden crunching, and the walls of one half of the room slid down, revealing a giant steel bracket, all lined with sharp metal hooks. We heard the scratch of a needle on a record, and the bright lights began to flash on and off. Chopin's Nocturne No. 2 flared into life, and there was a long series of audible clicks from the hooks, each as thin as a pencil but as long as a knitting needle. I stood stock still, trying not to laugh at the madness of the thing, feeling the music swell and rise, waiting for something to happen. Mel stared past me towards the chain. Maybe she was going to pull it once more to be certain it worked or something. I had no idea. But before she could get halfway, one of the many hooks shot through the air and buried itself in her shoulder. Blood impacted away from the wound and splattered the wall behind her, the yellow paint now speckled with red. Mel screamed and dropped to her knees. The hook was attached to a snaking iron chain that disappeared into a cavity past the iron grid of the bracket. This chain began to slowly but purposefully retract. Her screams clashed with Chopin as she flailed at the hook with her arm. This only succeeded in sending another prong from the bracket into her forearm. This chain also promptly tightened itself. I heard a metallic clicking noise as, link by link, the tethers began to drag Mel towards the edge of the room. I saw Neil try to get to his feet and shoved him back down, wham, onto his ass.
No, it's because she's moving. Stay right where you are.
But we have to help her.
I knew he was right, but what could we do?
Mel, you have to pull them out.
Are you kidding me?
You've got to. Stop moving and pull them out. It's the only way.
My throat was starting to hurt then. If I wasn't careful, I was going to tear my vocal cords. Her remaining arm moved to the hook in her shoulder. She wrapped her hand around it and gave a slight tug. She screamed and let it go. Tears dripped down her face.
I can't do that! It hurts too much!
You've got to do something.
I could see tears forming themselves in Neil's eyes as well. It must have been hell for him, seeing the girl he loved in that much pain and not being able to do anything about it.
If I move, then those chains will come for me too. There is nothing we can do.
Mel remained screaming and sliding across the floor. Chopin remained bright and cheerful as Neil's girlfriend struggled with the hooks. Whatever mechanism was pulling on the chains was moving faster now. Mel was being dragged with increasing speed towards the row of hooks. Her legs scrabbled on the floor, trying to find more grip, trying to stop the grim progress of the chains, but this only sent 2 more into her thighs, causing her to move all the faster. Soon her feet slipped in a track of blood, and she lost her hold altogether and went skidding across the ground. We watched in horror as, again, the chains sped up, and Mel was pulled upright against the bracket. Neil buried his head in his hands. He didn't want to see what came next. I wanted to turn away too. I knew whatever was going to happen to Mel was not going to be pretty, but I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the scene in front of me. The horror of it wouldn't let me go. Mel had been annoying, but no one deserved to die like that. The spikes burst through her stomach and chest and out of her back in a shower of blood, before quickly retracting and pulling her hard against the metal frame. She screamed, and for what felt like an eternity, the sound of splintering bones not quite drowned out by the music as Mel was pulped by the immense force exerted by the chains. And then as the chunks of her ruined body were pulled through the gaps in the bracket, blood sluiced down the metal and the yellow wall slid back up. It crunched into place, the record screeched off, and we were left in horrified silence. If it hadn't been for the bloodstains smeared all over the floor, you would never know anything had happened. Blood trails, finger paintings where you could see her handprints, and desperate smeared toe streaks.
What happened?
Neil was still covering his eyes.
Where is she? Where's Mel?
You really don't want to know.
I shuddered. My sentence was followed by a metal slamming noise. I looked over to see the door swing open.
Come on, let's get out of here.
I heaved Neil up by his armpits. I gripped him around the waist and pulled his arm around my shoulder. We approached the doorway, beyond which was, as I had expected, another dimly lit hallway. Like the one after the wire room, this was short enough to see the end of the corridor. This time it wasn't an elevator or a stairwell. This time it was simply a hole in the far wall. We hobbled through the door and began to move. I scanned the walls at about shin level, hoping against hope that I wouldn't find a small wooden hatch, praying for the first time in my life that we wouldn't hear running feet from behind us. Of course we didn't. I reminded myself that the first time we had seen the creature, we had been in the corridor just before the room of hooks. The hallway we were in now would only be the interlude before the next challenge. I dragged Neil to the end of the corridor into the hole. I could now see that someone had painted a large red heart around the gap. Not one of those little love hearts you see on Valentine's Day, one of the proper ones, the anatomically correct ones. It gleamed in the light cast by the lamps, dark red streaks of oil paint roughly slapped into the woodwork. I stared at the heart for a while, examining all the veins and ventricles before Neil coughed.
What the fuck are you waiting for? Let's get out of this fucking place.
I took a closer look at the hole. It was pitch black and I couldn't make out any shapes or noises. I leant Neil against the wall and gingerly put my hand into the empty space, just waiting for something to bite down on my hand and drag me in. There was nothing in there. All I could feel was smooth, round wall that went on for about a foot before the floor sloped away.
I think it's a slide.
I laughed. A slide seemed oddly childish for a house of horrors.
There's got to be a way out. We're still going down. Further into the fucking thing. For all we know, there's a fucking bear trap down there that's covered in glass and piss.
I drew back my hand and smacked Neil full force across the mouth. His skin was wet and hot with sweat and tears.
Listen, you stupid bastard. There is no other way to go. We have to follow his fucking trail, so it's either this slide and whatever's at the bottom, or we just give up and wait here to starve.
A trail of blood dripped from a split in his lip.
I just heard my girlfriend get torn apart. What the fuck do I care about getting out of here?
You might not want to live, but...
I dug my fingers into his shoulders and started to heave.
But I do!
I pulled Neil forward and helped him into the mouth of the chute. I watched him recede into the darkness, then drop away from my sight. I heard a slight whoosh and a short cry of surprise, then silence. I clambered into the hole and crawled on my hands and knees for a matter of seconds before the floor fell from under me and I was tumbling into nothing. I came to a sudden stop with such velocity that the wind was knocked from my lungs. I'd landed on something soft. I pushed my hand down to it and found that it was a layer of cushions, all made from different materials and designs. I felt patches of crust in some places of the covers, marks left by previous victims. I reached my hand out in front of me to feel for anything that I might stumble on, and it came down on what felt like denim. I heard a small cry, and the denim thing jerked away, causing a bigger cry. I guessed that the denim thing was Neil. Bright lights snapped on and illuminated the hallway we were in. It was long, longer than the one before the room of hooks, but I could see all the way to the end of this one thanks to the lights. They were cold and bright, either new or more like stage lights. That light showed me something else, something I should have been expecting but still made my heart drop.
Neil? I think we're going to have to run.
What? Why?
I stretched out one finger and pointed to the shin-high wooden hatch in the wall. Wordlessly, Neil nodded and I tugged into his feet, my back now aching from all the lifting I'd been doing.
You ready? Because we are seriously going to have to leg it.
Neil grimaced.
Yeah, let's get this over with.
I got ready, stretched my muscles, limbering up like an Olympian preparing to go for gold, and started running. I propelled myself along the corridor, dragging Neil after me. My trainers slammed into the floor and my heart pounded against my ribs. I could taste hot saliva in my mouth and my tongue felt swollen and bloated. When I heard a hatch opening, I nearly dropped Neil. The hound was loose. I heard those long nails on the floor behind us and I willed myself to move faster. My legs were burning now and I was muttering prayers to God, any God that could hear me deep under the earth and afraid. It was no use. I could hear the triumphant whoops from the thing behind us as it closed the distance. We were simply not fast enough. No matter how many breaths I took or how hard I powered my feet down, we weren't going to make it. Then a thought struck me. A bad one. I was out of options. The dark recesses of my mind chortled with glee and clapped their hands together, applauding me for my sickness as I hungrily seized the idea, my lifeline out of that place of nightmares. I gripped Neil tighter and unhooked his arm from around my shoulder. I shoved him away from me. He screamed with surprise and shock as he fell to the ground. I rushed on as his screams filled the stale air. The creature was on him. As I ran through the hall, that awful calcified gnawing sound of teeth on bone echoed off the walls and followed me. I crashed gratefully into the door and fumbled for the handle. I'd done it. I'd made it out. But maybe the least intact. I clutched the handle and turned to face down the corridor. I could see that thing crouched over Neil, blood glinting in the light as it pulled around my friend. The creature paused and looked up at me. For a horrible moment, I thought it would charge, but it simply grinned its terrible, snaggle-toothed grin and pointed at me. I thought it was marking me for its next meal, that it was going to spring on me. Instead, it took Neil by the shoulders and pulled his still twitching form backwards into the shadows. I greedily gulped down air. My legs ached. I just wanted this to be all over. I resigned myself to my fate, knowing that whatever was behind this door would end it. I turned the handle, shoved it open, and stumbled through. I felt a cool night breeze on my face. I opened my eyes and saw the fairground. I wheeled around and saw the wooden facade of Mr. Pickman's House of Horror, the plywood outdoor just shutting behind me. I fell to my knees, trampled grass soft beneath me. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes.
Cheer up, son!
Mr. Pickman strode into view. He seemed genuinely pleased to see me. I just lay there.
Nice going. I've been moving my little attraction up and down the country for a long time now, and let me tell you, you did very well. Very well.
He loomed closer for a second, exuding mock sympathy from that crumpled face. Just how old was this guy?
Yes, very well indeed. And in the end, well, it was him or you, wasn't it?
He bent down and slid something onto my lapel. It was a bright red badge. I grabbed at my jacket and pulled it to look at the button. I survived Mr. Pickman's House of Horror, it read in dark, spidery lettering. He tapped it, his nail making a ticking noise.
These things are rare, you know. Only a handful of people in all the world have one. So you got it well.
He finished up with a wink, straightening his back with a series of dry pops.
Why don't you come back next year, champ? Try your luck again.
His face broke in a smile that pulled at his lips like they'd been dragged up by fishhooks.
Maybe you won't lose so many friends the second time around, huh?
Pickman turned his back to me and disappeared through a side door into his shack. I heard him chuckle as he started off into his labyrinth, and under that... Was it the grinding of walls? The pathways and corridors reshaping themselves, reconstructing the place? Or just my imagination mixed with vibrations from the other rides? To this day, I haven't set foot in another carnival. I can't stand the smells of them. The oil on the machines, the popcorn and candy floss. If I see the lights or hear the calliope music playing late at night, I walk in the other direction. I don't know what I would do if I saw that old straw boater coming towards me through the crowd.
As the fires wane and embers glow, our stories cease as shadows grow. The night is long and darkness deep. Remain with us. Embrace no sleep. The No Sleep podcast is presented by Creative Reason Media. The musical score was composed by Brandon Boone. Our production team is Phil Mikulski, Jeff Clement, and Jesse Cornett. Our creative content manager is Olivia White. Our editor-in-chief is Jessica McAvoy. I'm your host and executive producer, David Cummings. Please visit the NoSleepPodcast.com for show notes and more details about the people who bring you this show. On behalf of everyone at the No Sleep Podcast, we thank you for listening and for being a supportive Season Pass member who is under our spell. This audio production is copyright 2021 and 2022 by Creative Reason Media, Inc., all rights reserved. The copyrights for each story are held by the respective authors. No duplication or reproduction of this audio program is permitted without the written consent of Creative Reason Media, Inc.